This story is fresh in my mind since it literally happened 6 weeks ago. My partner Claire and I needed a break, a real one. Not a long weekend with emails still coming in or a rushed Airbnb on the edge of a highway. We wanted quiet, no neighbors, no phone service, just trees and space and each other. I know how ridiculous this sounds now, but we were trying to reconnect, to reset, as she put it. We're not the type of couple you see in romantic getaway commercials, no matching flannel or wine tastings. We met at a grief counseling group in Pittsburgh, and everything between us has always been a little heavier. Claire lost her brother, I lost my dad. There was never any pretending with us. That's what made the silences between us feel safe, until they didn't. Most people who take weekend trips go somewhere lively, a lake, a cozy bed and breakfast, a cabin with Wi-Fi and board games. Ours was different. We don't do cute. We don't do rustic charm. We go deep, as far off-grid as we can legally camp without getting fined or hunted down by game wardens. Our only rule? We never return to the same place twice. I should have known better when Claire suggested the Hollow Pines property. She found it through an old friend who apparently knew someone renting out cabins deep in the Poconos, past anything that even looks like a road. Her friends swore it was beautiful, private, no neighbors, and surrounded by acres of untouched forest. Something about the word untouched stuck in my brain in a weird way, but I let it go. We packed light, 2 hiking packs, 1 for food and gear, 1 with clothes and water. I brought my old Nikon, and Claire packed a paperback she never got, around to finishing. I made sure to bring a small hatchet and one of those steel fire starters that can last through 100 storms. I don't mess around with cold. The drive took 4 hours, and the last hour was brutal. Winding gravel paths swallowed by pine needles, unmarked turns, and a final stretch that felt like driving into someone's dream. It wasn't just the trees, though they were tall and weirdly uniform. It was the silence. That deep, cotton-thick silence that swallows even the sound of your own tires. Claire rolled down the window and said, "I love it already." We found the cabin just before sunset. It was small and sturdy, clearly handmade, probably 20 years old. 2 rooms, 1 bedroom, and a combined kitchen-living area. A wood stove sat in the corner, surrounded by a neat stack of firewood. No lights, no switches, just lantern hooks and thick curtains. The windows looked out on nothing but pine. The place gave off the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. But it didn't feel creepy. Not yet. It felt sealed, like time didn't move here. I remember Claire stepping inside and saying, "This feels like it's waiting for something." She meant it as a compliment. I didn't ask what she thought. It was waiting for. That first night was the best night we'd had in months. We cooked a simple dinner on the propane stove, opened a bottle of wine I'd brought to surprise her, and played cards by the lantern. No phones, no buzz, just wood crackling and the smell of pine resin in the air. I took a photo of her across the table, her hair loose, head tilted back, mid-laugh, and something in me relaxed for the first time in weeks. Looking back, though, I think the forest was listening. We slept like we'd been drugged. Not a single dream, not even the usual tossing or midnight trips to the bathroom. When we woke up, the light through the trees was bright and gold, and the smell of the woods was thick enough to taste. We made coffee with instant grounds, and river water boiled over the stove. It was bitter and perfect. Around noon, Claire wanted to explore the woods. Just wander. No trail, just pick a direction and walk. That was always her thing. She loved the idea of finding something no one else had seen in decades. Maybe an old shack, maybe an animal den, maybe just a patch of untouched moss. I didn't love the idea of getting lost, but I trusted her sense of direction more than my own, so we packed some jerky and water and headed out. And the trees in Hollow Pines are weird, not just tall, but exactly tall. I know how that sounds, but they were all too similar, like someone had copy-pasted them across the land. Straight trunks, evenly spaced, same brittle brown needles. After an hour, I started to get that old dizzy feeling in my chest, the kind you get when your body knows something isn't quite right, even if your brain won't admit it. Then the whispering started. It was soft at first, so soft we both thought it was wind, but the air was still, no breeze, no rustling, just a low hush that moved from tree to tree, like it was circling us. Claire turned toward me and said, "Did you just say something?" I hadn't. I swear I hadn't. But something about the tone in her voice. She wasn't joking. We both stood still, listening. The sound came again, just behind us, like a voice through cupped hands. Not words, not yet. Just rhythm, like breathing that almost turned into speech. "I think we should go back," I said. Claire didn't argue. That's how I knew she'd heard it too. The walk back felt longer, like the forest had shifted slightly behind us, changing angles while we weren't looking. It was still day, still bright, but that silence had teeth now. Every step sounded too loud. Every glance behind us felt like an admission. When we reached the cabin, the front door was open. The door was open just enough to make my stomach drop. Not kicked in or broken, just unlatched. Like someone had stepped out and forgot to close it all the way. Except we both knew we had locked it that morning. Claire was obsessive about it. 3 turns of the key, top bolt, then tug the handle twice to be sure. She stepped forward first, calling out a shaky, "Hello?" before crossing the threshold. I followed, slow and tense, my hand tightening. Around the handle of the hatchet, still looped through my pack. But the cabin was empty. No mess. No broken glass, just the way we left it, except for one thing, the photo, the one I'd taken the night before, of Claire laughing across the table. I'd left my camera zipped in the outer pouch of my pack, and I hadn't printed anything, but there it was, our faces lit by lantern glow, her wine glass raised, my reflection caught in the window behind her, printed, crookedly cut, and pinned to the wall beside the bed with a nail we hadn't noticed before. Claire didn't say anything. She just turned and walked outside, fast. I followed. She sat on the steps, staring into the trees, not blinking. I stood behind her, for a while, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, she said, "That photo, that exact one, was on my brother's phone." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "He took that picture of me at some bar in Shadyside years ago. The angle, the look, everything. It's the same photo." I didn't know what to say. I remember checking my camera. The photo was there, exactly the same as the one on the wall, but I'd taken it the night before. I knew I had. "I think I want to go tomorrow," she said. "Please." I nodded. Of course. Whatever she needed. We'd make it through one more night. But deep down, I already knew. This place wasn't going to let go that easily. That night, Claire made a fire while I filled our water bottles from the nearby stream. When I came back, she was sitting cross-legged in front of the flames, tearing pages out of her paperback and tossing them in one by one. "We don't need words out here," she said, without looking at me. "They don't mean the same here anyway." I didn't argue. I just sat next to her and listened to the paper curl and blacken. I tried to sleep later, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard whispers, not out loud, not like before, but under my skin. like memories trying to speak through bone. Looking back though, I think that's when the forest really started working on us. The next morning, Claire was different. Quieter. She had already packed her things before I even got out of bed, which was unlike her. Normally, she dragged mornings out, long coffee, walks barefoot to the creek, fingers in the moss. This time she was standing by the door, dressed, boots laced, hands shaking slightly. "I want to leave now," she said. "It's not just the photo. I heard my brother's voice in the trees last night. He said my name, but it was wrong. It was like he was underwater." I didn't question her. I believed her, but I also knew the jeep was a 2-hour hike away. We had to go now or not at all. We hiked in silence. No breakfast, no coffee. Just grabbed our packs and left the cabin door wide open. I didn't care anymore about closing it. Whatever had come in before, it already knew where we'd been. The forest felt worse now, angled wrong. The path we'd taken to get there didn't look the same. I tried using my GPS, but it just spun and blinked, showing no connection. The sun was high, but the light felt thin, like it was struggling to reach the ground through the pines. Claire whispered, "It's trying to keep us here." I didn't ask what it was. Halfway to the jeep, we saw something that stopped us cold, a backpack nailed to a tree. Old, mouldy, blue, with a faded patch that read "Campfire." Inside was a Polaroid photo, still surprisingly intact, despite the weather. It showed a couple in front of a different cabin, but the man in the photo looked like me. Not similar, identical. Same face, same haircut, even the same scar above the left eyebrow from a baseball when I was 12. Claire looked at it and dropped it like it burned her hand. She said, "You never went to Campfire, right?" I shook my head, but I couldn't stop staring at that face. It was me. We left the bag, but the damage was done. Claire wouldn't walk ahead of me anymore. She started muttering under her breath, things I couldn't catch. When I asked, she said, "I don't think you're the same guy I came here with." That hurt more than it should have. By the time we reached where we'd left the jeep, the clearing was gone. Just gone. The trees had closed in, no tire marks, no flat grass, no gravel, just more pine. More endless pine. Claire dropped her pack and sat down, breathing fast. "This isn't possible. I marked the path. I marked it." I checked my compass. It spun. Then the whispering came again. Only this time, it was my voice I heard, calling her name. I froze when I heard it. My own voice, from somewhere just behind the trees, calling out Claire's name. Not yelling, not panicked, just casual, even warm, like I was inviting her in for dinner. Claire turned to me, wide-eyed, then turned back to the woods where the sound had come from. "You heard that too?" she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, jaw tight. I couldn't speak. That voice had matched mine exactly. Intonation, pitch, even the soft rasp I get when I haven't slept. But it wasn't me. I hadn't said anything. I could barely breathe. Claire stood up slowly and shouldered her pack again. "We have to go. Keep moving. Whatever this place is, it's trying to get in our heads. And if we stop, it wins." I followed her lead, but every step felt heavier. The woods didn't just feel alive anymore. They felt aware, like it had learned our sounds, our fears, and was figuring out what to do next. I kept glancing sideways at her, suddenly unsure of everything. Was this really Claire? Was I still me? We kept moving for hours, or maybe it was one. Time was slippery. The sun seemed stuck in the same spot. The trees didn't change. And then Claire stopped again, this time by a familiar patch of broken bark. "We've been here before," she whispered. "That's my mark." She pointed to a strip of stripped bark where she'd carved a C with her knife earlier that morning. "We've walked in a circle." My stomach dropped. There was no way. We hadn't veered off. We'd walked in a straight line, or so I thought. But the forest had wrapped around us, turned in on itself, until we were right back where we started. That's when I heard my father's voice. It came from deep in the trees to our left. Just 2 words. "Come home." And it wasn't muffled or distant. It was clear. Exactly the way he used to say it when I'd be out too late, and he was waiting on the porch, half worried, half mad. My dad died 4 years ago. I felt my knees buckle and sat down hard on a rock. Claire knelt in front of me, held my face. "What did you hear?" she asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so hard I thought they'd fly off my wrists. I wanted to run, but where? Every direction felt wrong. We set up a quick camp by default, too scared to move, too drained to keep going. No fire, just a tarp and 2 bedrolls between trees. We didn't speak much. We ate in silence, jerky and stale trail mix, and I kept feeling like I was being watched. At one point, Claire sat bolt upright and whispered, "There's something walking the perimeter." Her voice was too calm. It scared me more than if she'd screamed. "It's circling, and it's wearing my brother's voice now." I didn't ask how she knew. I just listened, and she was right. A soft voice called her name from beyond the trees, too steady, too slow. Like someone reading a script written by someone who had only heard human speech once. Every hair on my body stood up. I gripped the hatchet. She held her knife. Then silence. That night we didn't sleep. The tarp above us moved without wind. The dirt under us felt warmer than the air. Claire kept drawing shapes into the soil with her fingers, over and over again, circles, interlocking ones. I asked what they meant, and she just said, "He used to draw these, in notebooks, all the time." "Who?" "My brother." The next morning, we found our food bag gone. Not torn or dragged away, gone. The carabiner was still clipped, the rope was still tied, but the dry bag was just missing. In its place was a single object, Claire's paperback, burned at the edges, pages stiff with water damage. We'd left it in the fire pit back at the cabin. She picked it up and said, "It doesn't want us to forget." But we tried walking. Again, this time in a different direction, breaking branches behind us to leave a trail. It didn't matter. 3 hours later, we found the same tree again with her bark mark on it. But the mark had changed. Instead of a C, there was now a full name carved into it. Claire Adler, clean and sharp like it had been done with a fresh blade. Her breathing started to go fast. I never carved my last name. That's when we heard my voice again, from the trees behind us. "Claire," it said softly. Then a laugh. My laugh. We turned and ran. No direction, just away. But the forest stayed with us. The trees didn't move, but the space between them did. Angles turned, paths shifted, light dimmed even though the sky was clear. We came to a stream. Not the one we'd crossed earlier, a different one, with dark water and no sound. It was too still. Claire knelt beside it, cupped her hands to drink. I pulled her back. "Look," I whispered. Beneath the water's surface, there were faces. Ours, but they didn't blink. They just stared back up at us, mouths barely open, as if waiting for us to speak. We didn't drink from the stream. We backed away slowly, like we were afraid to wake whatever versions of ourselves were staring up from the water. Claire was crying, but quietly. No shaking, no sobs, just tears falling down her face in steady lines. I didn't even notice my own until I felt one hit my collarbone. We followed the stream, hoping it would lead to a road or the place we left the jeep, but after half an hour the water simply stopped. Not dried up, stopped, like it hit a wall underground and vanished. The bed continued on for another 20 feet, then ended in hard-packed dirt. No debris, no outlet, just dead earth. And that's when Claire grabbed my wrist. "Look," she said, pointing to a small clearing. Beyond the dried stream bed. "Do you see it?" Our cabin. The exact one we left hours, maybe days, ago. But it wasn't ours. The porch was rotting, the roof sagged, the windows were broken, and it was covered in pine needles, dust, and thick ropes of ivy that hadn't been there before. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Claire whispered, "No, that's not it."
"That's not the same one." I tried to pull her back, but she stepped toward it, slowly, like in a trance. "I think it wants us to see it. It's showing us something." I followed. I couldn't let her go alone. We stepped up onto the
porch. Each plank groaned like it was in pain. The door was half open, just like before. She pushed it slowly. The interior was almost pitch dark, despite the daylight outside. Inside, the layout was identical. Same stove, same table, same old iron lantern hanging from the ceiling. But the walls were different, covered in photos, all black and white, all printed on thick, glossy paper. Each photo was of someone standing in front of the cabin, looking scared, and in every single one there was something tall and thin in the background, just standing among the trees, watching. Claire found a photo of herself. A younger version, maybe 17, standing with her brother, holding a backpack. "This can't be real," she whispered. This was our trip to Ricketts Glen. I've never been here before. She tore it off the wall, and behind it was writing, scratched deep into the wood. A name, A. Adler, followed by a date from 5 years ago. Her brother's name was Alex. "I don't remember him ever being here," she said, her voice cracking. "Why would he come here alone?" We didn't speak for a long time. Eventually she said, "I think this place isn't just watching. I think it remembers people." We searched the rest of the cabin. There was no furniture besides the table and one broken chair. The bedroom was worse. Rotted mattress, broken window, dried bloodstains on the walls. The closet door was missing entirely, and scrawled across the frame were the words, "Don't answer it." Claire turned to me and said, "I think it's learning. It used my brother's voice. It used yours. I think it feeds on something about us, like memory, familiarity." I asked the question out loud that had been growing in the back of my mind. Then what happens when it knows us completely? She didn't answer. We left the cabin, but the world outside didn't feel right anymore. The trees were closer together. The light was lower. Time kept slipping. Minutes stretched or collapsed without warning. At one point we heard laughter in the distance, Claire's laughter, but she hadn't said a word in over an hour. "I didn't laugh," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "That wasn't me." We walked faster. When we reached what should have been the path back to the stream, we saw something standing just inside the trees. It was Claire. Same height, same jacket, same hair twisted up in the messy knot she always made when she was stressed. She stood facing away from us, motionless. Then slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder, too
far, and smiled. Claire, the real Claire, started gasping for air.
She was having a panic attack, gripping the front of her coat, trying to breathe. I grabbed her and said, "Don't look, don't listen, just keep walking." But the other Claire was still watching us, smile too wide, eyes too dark. Then She whispered something I'll never forget. We're so close now. Not in Claire's voice, not really, just close. Like an echo of it. Like something had heard her speak 1,000 times and tried to wear her voice like a coat. We ran. Branches clawed at our arms and faces. The pine floor turned to mud beneath our feet. I lost a boot somewhere but didn't stop. Claire stumbled and I dragged her up. Her face was streaked with blood and tears, but she didn't speak again until we reached a clearing filled with dead trees, stripped bare, pointing like fingers out toward a grey sky. There in the center was a fire pit, dead ashes and nailed.
To one of the trees was another photo. The time it was of both of us, standing side by side, smiling. But we had never taken that photo, ever. And in the photo we were standing in this clearing. We stared at the photo nailed to that
Tree for a long time, not speaking, not moving. There we were, arms wrapped around each other, smiling like nothing was wrong. Like this was just another weekend in the woods. And it was taken in this very clearing. Same dead trees, same sky. But the camera angle was too high, like whoever took it had been standing above us. I never smiled like that, Claire whispered.
That's not my real smile. I stepped closer, looked again. She was right. There was something strange about it. Too many teeth showing, eyes just a little too wide, like someone had practiced being human, but never quite figured out how the face was supposed to work.
I glanced at my own expression in the photo and saw the same thing. The realization hit slowly, sickly, like nausea crawling up your throat. We weren't being hunted, not in the way we thought. We were being copied. All of it. The voices, the laughter, the photo on the cabin wall, the way the trail kept turning us around. It wasn't just haunting, it was learning. Hollow Pines wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was something else, a presence that studied people, wore them like clothes, then left the empty shells behind. I think that thing has been watching people for years, I said quietly. Maybe decades, taking bits of them, voices, faces,
even movements. Claire sat down hard on the dirt. What if my brother didn't just die? What if this is where he ended up? She started sobbing, real tears this time, not the frozen ones from earlier.
What if I never saw him again because he never left this place? I didn't know what to say. I just sat beside her. The wind picked up a little, moving the trees, not wildly, but just enough that they almost looked like they were swaying, in time with each other. And then we heard running. Not animal footsteps, human ones, fast, panicked. We stood up, clutching our packs and staring toward the sound, and a figure burst into the clearing. It was me. He was bleeding. From the temple, his clothes torn, breathing hard like he'd been running for miles. "Don't trust her," he gasped, pointing at Claire. "It got her. That's not Claire." Claire stepped behind me. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. "What is it doing?" I couldn't breathe. Two of me, both alive, both terrified, both begging me to believe them. Then Claire stepped forward, reached into her coat, and pulled out a photo, a printed one, clean, still warm from wherever it had been made. It was of her, sitting in the same clearing, alone, staring at the photo we'd found nailed to the tree, and the caption written under it, in black ink, read, "She saw too much." I looked up, and she was gone. The photo dropped to the ground. The fake me, if that's what it was, stood perfectly still, no longer out of breath. "You need to leave," it said, calmly now. "You need to run. It's done with her." I backed away slowly. I didn't believe either of them anymore. Claire, the other me. even myself. Something was unraveling. My memories started slipping. What day it was. Where we parked the Jeep. My name. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms. Something sliced my cheek. I didn't stop. The woods felt alive, not just watching anymore, but chasing. I heard my voice behind me, shouting my childhood nickname. I heard my dad yelling. I heard Claire laughing. All of it chasing me, mocking me, like it had peeled my entire life open and was playing it back through broken speakers. Eventually, I reached a new clearing. Not the same one. This one had a single tree in the middle, charred black from some long ago fire. Beneath it was a shallow hole. Inside the hole was another version of me, curled up, pale, eyes open, dead. I
stood over the pit for maybe 10 seconds before my brain let me feel what I was seeing. It was me. Pale, lips blue, my own face, arms tucked close to the chest like a child, clothes identical to what I was wearing, same scuffed boots, same threadbare hoodie, the scar above my brow, all of it, just lifeless. Something had put it there, laid it in the dirt like a display, like a threat, like a reminder. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, and fell hard.
My hands scraped against a pine cone and I barely noticed. My breath came out in short gasps that wouldn't slow down. My mind kept spinning with one word, over and over again. Me, 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 me. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been seconds, could have been 20 minutes. But the air shifted again. That silence that presses into your ears until you start hearing your own pulse. And then the whispers returned, closer now, louder, no longer pretending to be voices I knew. They were becoming me. You can rest now, they said. Let go. You've been here before. I started to run again. I didn't think about where. I just moved. The trees started to blur together like I was inside a bad dream. Every path looked the same. Every sound echoed too close. My legs burned. My throat was raw. Still, I ran. And then I saw Claire. Not one Claire, 5. Scattered between the trees. Each one standing still watching me. Some had blood on their faces. One was barefoot. Another held a photo in each hand, but they all wore that same expression, soft, quiet, wrong. Like puppets waiting for their next scene. I screamed and kept running. Eventually the woods opened up, not to a road, but to the cabin, the original one, ours, untouched, firewood still stacked, curtains still drawn, no rot, no broken windows. It was like time had reversed. I didn't trust it, but it was shelter. I threw open the door and slammed it behind me, locked it, bolted the windows, sat on the floor in the dark, listening to the world breathe outside. Something brushed against the walls every few minutes. A soft, dragging sound. Once, I heard fingers tapping the glass. Just once. Then nothing. In the silence, I looked around. The photos were gone. The scratches in the bedroom had vanished. The closet door was back and shut. And the lantern on the table flickered to life on its own. Soft, orange, warm. For one insane moment, I wanted to believe I'd imagined everything, that I'd
had some kind of mental break, that none of it was real. But then I saw my backpack still resting by the door.
I hadn't carried it back. I'd dropped it in the woods hours ago, or days, or however long it had been. I opened it, half hoping to find food, my phone, a compass. Instead, I found photos, hundreds of them, all of me, all from behind, walking into the woods, sitting by the fire, sleeping in the hammock, talking to Claire. Some taken from eye level, others from angles far too high up in the trees. the last photo
was of me holding this very photo. That's when I heard the door unlock. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near it. The bolt slid back with a slow, grinding sound. The handle turned, and I knew I wasn't alone in the cabin anymore. I ran into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, and shoved the dresser against it. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the lantern. Then I heard the front door creak open. Footsteps. Slow dragging ones. And then...
humming. Claire's voice, off key. The same song she always hummed when she was nervous. Only this time, it wasn't just humming, it was off. Too flat, too slow. Like someone mimicking the sound without understanding what a melody was. The bedroom door creaked under pressure. I backed into the corner, clutching the lantern like it was a weapon. My reflection in the glass showed me something I'll never forget. Behind me, in the closet mirror, a tall shape was forming. Something human-shaped, but stretched. Wearing the suggestion of my face, like a blurry photo, and it smiled. That's when I snapped. I kicked out the window, glass shattering everywhere, and threw myself through the opening. I didn't look back, not once. I ran until my lungs gave out, until my feet were bleeding, until the trees looked different again, less uniform, less alive. Somehow, I found the Jeep, still parked, covered in needles, but real. I jumped in, turned the key, and it started. No hesitation, no delay. I didn't stop driving until the trees turned to road signs and asphalt. And even then, I didn't stop. I don't remember the drive back. I know that I made it, because I woke up in my apartment the next afternoon, fully clothed, shoes still on, keys on the floor. The Jeep was in the lot, muddy, pine needles still stuck under the wipers. I must have gotten in sometime before dawn. I must have unlocked the door. But there's a hole in my memory, clean, cold, and hollow. The next few days passed like
fog. I didn't go to work. Didn't eat much. Every time I looked in the mirror, I thought I saw someone else standing just behind me.
Not a full shape, just the suggestion of something tall, watching. Claire never came back. I filed a missing persons report after 4 days. The police asked for a last known location, and I gave them coordinates to Hollow Pines, the best I could. A state trooper called me a week later and said they'd found a cabin but no sign of anyone.
No tracks, no supplies, not even a single photo. He said there was no trail to or from the cabin, just trees. He asked if I was sure that's where we'd gone. I stopped answering calls after that. Sometimes late at night, I hear humming.
From outside my window, just soft enough that I can tell it's not the wind. The same broken melody Claire always used when she felt anxious. When I go outside to look, there's nothing there. No people, no prints, just a light dusting of pine needles on the welcome mat. 3 nights ago, I found a photo tucked under my pillow. It showed me sleeping in bed. The angle was from inside the closet. I tore it up, burned the pieces in the sink, watched them curl and blacken just like the pages of Claire's book in the fire. But I know that wasn't the end. Yesterday, I passed a storefront on my street I've walked by 100 times. One of those antique places that changes names every few months. I never pay attention. But this time I looked in the window and
saw myself inside. I was holding the lantern. I didn't go inside. I didn't move. I just stared. And the reflection in the glass stared back at me. But it didn't blink when I did. It smiled. I still don't know what Hollow Pines really is. I don't know if it's a place or something older that lives there. I don't.
Know how long it's been collecting us, learning us, becoming us, but I do know this. The forest isn't done with me, and if you hear your own voice calling from the trees, don't answer it. I never believed in backwoods ghost stories or ranger folklore, not until I had to deal with what my Uncle George left behind. What started as a simple inheritance situation turned into the most disturbing few months of my life. I thought I was getting a quiet retirement spot, a tucked-away slice of Oregon forest where I could drink my coffee in peace and listen to the birds. Instead, I inherited something I can't explain, something that doesn't sleep, and something that knows. When I'm looking, my uncle was always the odd one in the family. That wasn't a secret. He was the kind of man who could be warm for 5 minutes and then cold for hours. No wife, no kids. He spent most of his adult life as a forest ranger in central Oregon, monitoring fire danger and hiking trails no one ever used. We only saw him during Christmas, and even then he mostly sat on the porch or in the garage, talking to himself in mutters that didn't sound like any conversation I wanted to interrupt. Everyone said he was harmless, just touched by too many years alone in the woods. Looking back, though, I should have known better. The cabin was part of his estate. It wasn't in his will directly, but the deed was in his name, and no one else wanted it. The family asked if I'd take it, since I'd recently taken early retirement and talked non-stop about getting out of the city. I said yes, without thinking, mostly because I remembered how peaceful that forest looked in old photos, and I figured it would be good for my nerves. If only I had listened to the hesitation in my cousin's voice when he handed me the keys. Getting there took longer than I thought. I followed an old gravel road, about 2 miles past, where Google Maps said it should end. The place was deeper in than I expected, quiet, still, surrounded by old-growth pine that choked out most of the light by mid-afternoon, but it was beautiful. The kind of quiet you don't get near highways or cell towers. A thick, breathing quiet. I remember stepping out of my truck, stretching my back and thinking, this might actually be good for me. The cabin was simple. Wood frame, stone chimney, no satellite dish or modern touch on the outside. Just like the old ranger lodges from decades ago. It had 2 visible windows, one beside the front door and one to the right, near the bedroom. That's what I remembered. That's what the photos showed. 2 windows. So imagine how strange it was when, my first night unpacking, I looked up from the yard and saw 3. One in the kitchen, one in the bedroom, and one, smaller, high up on the left side of the cabin near the peak of the roofline. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if I'd simply missed it earlier. I even took out my phone, pulled up the listing photos, and sure enough, only 2 windows, always had been. I told myself I must have just never noticed it, that it had always been there, that maybe it was part of the attic, or a crawl space. I went back inside and forgot about it, or tried to. That night I barely slept. Not because of the window. Just the usual new place jitters. The wood creaked every time the wind moved. The floor had a weird slope. The bathroom fan sounded like it was chewing on gravel, but that's all normal stuff for a house this old, right? I told myself I'd get used to it. I woke up around 3:20 a.m. and had to use the bathroom. The hallway was colder than the bedroom, like the air dropped 20 degrees the moment I stepped out. I passed the front door and something made me stop. I looked up through the glass panel beside it. The third window had a light on. Not a glow, not a reflection. A light, yellowish like a bulb you'd find in a basement or garage, and behind it, movement. a shadow shifting from side to side. Slow. Just enough to make me freeze where I stood. I turned all the lights on in the cabin and searched the upper level, but there was no staircase, no attic hatch, no ladder, just flat ceiling and old beams. That looked like they hadn't been touched in 20 years. The third window didn't exist from the inside. I should have known better. The signs were all there, but I brushed it off. Told myself it was a trick of the moonlight, maybe my reflection. But the truth is, I recognized that shape in the window. It looked like my uncle. The next morning, I walked the entire property. I needed to convince myself I'd imagined what I saw. The air was cool and crisp, the kind that should have been refreshing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There was a ridge behind the cabin, steep and overgrown, with deer trails crisscrossing through the underbrush. I took a walk up part of it and looked down at the roof from above. The third window was definitely there. A small square pane built into the upper gable. From that angle I could even see a curtain drawn halfway across it. That's when I knew I wasn't just imagining things. It wasn't a trick of the light. That window was real, but only from the outside. Back inside, I examined every inch of ceiling, every wall, looking for a hatch or access point. The ceilings weren't high, vaulted with exposed beams in the living room and tongue and groove planks running across the top. No signs of a crawl space or attic. Nothing I could push open or climb into. I even took a flashlight and checked the closet in the bedroom, hoping maybe there was a hidden access panel. Still nothing. It was maddening. There was no physical way to reach where that window would be, and no space in the cabin's layout that could explain it. At this point, I was still trying to be rational. I figured maybe it had once been an attic, and the interior had been sealed off during a remodel. Maybe my uncle had closed it up decades ago. I dug through the kitchen drawers and found a few old blueprints, water-stained and torn. They were incomplete. One was labeled Ranger Cabin Wall 9, partial layout. There was a second floor marked faintly in pencil, but someone had scribbled over it with black ink, big looping X's that scratched right through the lines. The days passed slowly. During daylight, everything seemed normal, peaceful even. I spent time organizing my tools, fixing up the porch rail, and clearing a path to the old shed out back. But nights were harder. Every time the sun went down, that third window became visible again. And not just visible, active. I never saw the light inside turn on again like the first night, but I'd catch glimpses of movement behind the glass, shapes shifting just out of focus. Sometimes they looked human, sometimes not. Once I thought I saw the outline of antlers. Another night, something pressed against the glass like a hand, or something with fingers longer than a hand should have. I still haven't told anyone. My sister called once to check in, asked how the treehouse retirement was going. I joked about splinters and too much bird noise, but I didn't mention the window. I didn't want to sound crazy, and truthfully, I wasn't ready to say it out loud. It made it too real. I was still hoping it would stop, that I'd wake up one morning and it would be gone. But it didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. One evening, I went out to cut some firewood before the weather turned. The sun was already dipping below the wall trees when I heard something heavy land on the roof. Not a branch falling. This was deliberate. A thud, like someone jumping down from a ledge. I froze. The axe slipped in my grip and hit the dirt. I looked up, but from the yard I couldn't see the top of the cabin clearly anymore. The third window was out of view from ground level, tucked just beyond the overhang. I grabbed the axe and backed toward the cabin, eyes locked on the tree line, convinced I was about to see a bear, or worse. I heard it again the next night.
And the next? Always after sunset. Always after I'd let my guard down, just enough to believe I might get a good night's sleep. There'd be a loud thump on the roof, followed by a soft, dragging scrape, like claws or fingernails being pulled across the shingles.
And always, the third window would be just slightly fogged over the next morning, like someone had breathed against it from the inside. By the end of that week, I knew something was inside the walls. I just didn't know how to get to it. It started small, as these things always do. Sounds I couldn't place, doors that creaked open even though I'd latched them shut, objects not where I left them. I'd place my flashlight on the kitchen counter, and the next morning it'd be in the sink. A half-filled mug of coffee went missing one morning while I was shaving, only to reappear outside on the porch railing, still warm. I told myself I was just forgetful, still adjusting to the quiet, the isolation. But part of me knew I wasn't alone. There was a rhythm to it, a slow drip of wrongness that felt intentional, like something toying with me just beneath the surface.
Of understanding. The first real incident happened in the middle of the night. I was asleep in the bedroom, the kind of sleep that's too deep to be restful, and I woke up to the sound of a whisper. Not one voice, but several, murmuring just outside the bedroom window.
I sat up in the dark, heart racing, and listened. The voices weren't speaking English, or at least not clearly. It sounded like someone repeating words underwater, thick and bubbling. Then a single sharp knock on the window jolted me completely. Awake. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and yanked open the curtain. Nothing, just fog clinging to the glass, and my own reflection staring back at me. I went outside with my rifle, barefoot and furious, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. But the night was dead quiet. No movement, no breeze, no animals. I circled the house twice, checked the tree line with my light, and came back inside, more unsettled than before. The whispers had stopped, but the third window now had a light behind it again, a faint, golden glow like a lantern. I stared at it for a long time from the yard, trying to catch any movement behind the glass. For a brief second I thought I saw my uncle again, just his silhouette, leaning forward as if he were watching me, like a child in the dark staring down from a hidden attic. Then the light went out. I didn't sleep at all after that. I made coffee at 4 a.m. just to have something warm in my hands. Around sunrise I went up the ridge again to see if I could spot any signs of life, tracks, scat, even litter. Something to prove I wasn't imagining things. But the ridge was untouched, just damp pine needles and patches of moss. No prints.
No movement. I crouched near the top, right above the roof, and watched that third window. Nothing moved for the full hour I waited.
But when I turned to leave, I caught a glint of something beneath the leaves. It was a photo, water damaged, curled at the edges, but unmistakably a picture. I wiped it off and stared at it for a long time. It was my uncle, standing in front of the cabin. Except there were 3 windows in the shot, clear as day. And in the third one, in the upper gable, someone was standing behind the glass. Their face was turned, obscured, but the height was all wrong. Too tall. They were bent down slightly, just to be seen in the frame. I took the photo back with me, laid it flat on the table, and stared at it under the kitchen light for hours. It looked real, not edited, not staged. The trees in the background were the same, the porch boards matched perfectly, but that person in the window, that thing, did not belong. When I flipped the photo over, there was a note scrawled on the back in faint pencil. It read, "Don't look at it. It sees you when you see it." After that, I started keeping the curtains drawn at night. Every window, every door, I blocked. The front window with a sheet of plywood I found in the shed. I jammed a chair under the doorknob in the bedroom. I stopped going out after sunset, even to the porch. Something was watching me from that window, and now I knew it knew when I was watching back. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I heard the soft sound of someone walking across the roof again, slow, dragging steps above the bedroom. Then the unmistakable sound of breathing, labored, wheezy, like lungs filled with water. It was right above me. I covered my ears and lay perfectly still, counting my breaths, praying the sound would fade. But it didn't. It only stopped when the sun came up. A few days after finding the photo, I decided to stop pretending everything was normal. If I was going to stay in that cabin and I wasn't ready to give it up yet, not out of pride, but because I had to know what was happening, I needed answers. My first step was the shed out back. My uncle had always kept it padlocked, and while the key hadn't come with the rest of his stuff, I figured I could pry the latch open with a crowbar. It took more effort than I thought, and when the door finally creaked open, a rush of stale, trapped air poured out like something had been sealed inside for decades. Inside, the shed was more like a personal archive. Shelves lined all four walls, stacked with plastic bins, rusty filing cabinets, yellowed boxes, and old Ranger logs. The logs were dated, labeled by hand, and organized by year, some going back to the late 70s. I pulled a random one down and opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably George's, tight, angled, written with a fountain pen in tidy, neat strokes. The entries at first were normal: trail conditions, weather, rare animal sightings, but by the mid-90s the tone had shifted. The entries started to include odd notes in the margins, mentions of lights seen in places where no one should have been, descriptions of hearing footsteps in the trees, always at night. And then a recurring phrase that showed up more and more: the third window. The first time he wrote about it was in 1994. Woke at 3:17 a.m, light in the third window again. Not possible. No attic access. Shadow moved away when I stood up. Doesn't want me to see it. That exact phrasing appeared again, months later, almost word for word. As I kept reading, it became clear my uncle had become obsessed. He wasn't just documenting what he saw, he was trying to understand it, control it. He sketched the cabin from different angles in the log margins, always including that third window. Sometimes he drew what he saw inside it: vague shapes, long limbs, a face made of shadows. In one entry from 1998, he wrote, "It mimics, doesn't speak, but it watches me watching. Every time I blink it moves." Another, later that year, "It stood outside the bedroom window, not a dream, left muddy handprints, 4 fingers, no thumb." There were photographs too, grainy Polaroids, black and white prints, some so washed out I could barely make out the images, but a few showed what looked like shadows behind the glass of the third window, sometimes tall, sometimes crouched, always wrong, always out of place. One photo made me stop breathing altogether. It was taken from inside the cabin, clearly from the living room, and it showed the third window from below. And in that photo, pressed against the glass, was a face. It wasn't my uncle's, it wasn't human. The skin looked waxy, too smooth, and the eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just voids. I took that photo inside and laid it next to the one I'd found on the ridge. Same face, same window, years apart. Whatever this thing was, it hadn't left. Not in all that time. Maybe it couldn't. Or maybe it didn't want to. I called my cousin Dan, the only family member who'd ever spent time up here besides George. He didn't answer, so I left a voicemail asking about the cabin's history, any strange stories, anything at all. He called back an hour later, and the first thing he asked was, "Have you seen the window?" I told him yes. I told him everything, what I'd heard, what I'd seen, and what I'd read in George's logs. There was a long silence on the other end, and when he finally spoke, his voice was shaky. He said, "I stayed there for 2 weeks when I was 19, thought it'd be a nice break before college. One night I woke up and saw someone staring in at me from that window. I ran outside and there was nobody on the roof. But the window was open, it was always shut before. I left the next morning and never went back." I asked him if he ever told George. He said no, he didn't want to sound crazy, and George already seemed so tightly wound. I pressed him. Did he remember if anyone else ever mentioned that window? He said he didn't know, just that George had told him once, out of nowhere, "Don't ever look up when it's quiet. It likes that." That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I made up the couch in the living room and kept every light on. Just after midnight, the power went out. No warning. No wind or storm. Just silence, and then total darkness. I tried the flashlight. Dead. I reached for my phone. Black screen. I knew I'd charged it before dinner. Then the floor above me creaked. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, wrapped in thick, unnatural darkness. The kind you don't often experience anymore, the total blackout that only happens deep in the wilderness when the power goes and there's not even moonlight to cut the edge of the shadows. The air felt heavy, too still, and the only sound I could hear was the slow, steady creaking of weight shifting above me. The same spot over and over again, just above the rafters where, by every plan and blueprint,
I had seen no one should have been able to stand.
There was no attic, no crawl space, no floor up there. But something was standing above me. I didn't speak, didn't move. I held my breath for what felt like minutes, staring up into the beams. Then came another sound, a soft scrape, like bare skin dragging slowly across wood. Not footsteps anymore, just pressure, movement, sliding closer to where the ceiling met the wall. I backed away slowly, inching toward the front door. That's when I saw it. A shape, tall and wide-shouldered, silhouetted in the third window. It wasn't behind glass anymore. It was inside. That window now looked out into my living room. My legs nearly gave out. I couldn't tell how it had happened, how the angle could possibly work. But I saw the curtain on the other side, fluttering gently, as if the window had just been opened from within. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, almost brushing. The top of the frame, too big for the space, like it had folded itself to fit. I turned and bolted out the door, barefoot, keys forgotten, the cold porch slamming against my feet. I didn't stop running until I hit the edge of the woods. I stayed out there until morning, crouched under a tree with nothing but my breath to keep me warm. When the sun finally came up, I expected the cabin to look different, to be changed somehow, but it was exactly the same. Front door still shut, no signs of forced entry, no footprints on the roof. And yet, when I finally worked up the nerve to go back inside, I found something waiting for me in the middle of the kitchen floor. It was the photograph I had taken from the shed, the one showing the face in the third window. It was torn, in half, cleanly, and placed with both sides face up, edges nearly touching, like someone wanted me to know they had seen it, handled it, and left it exactly where I would find it.
I searched the rest of the cabin in a panic. Nothing else was moved, nothing else was touched. But the third window from the inside now looked open. Not shattered, not broken, just opened slightly as if it had always had a latch and someone
Had simply unfastened it. I took a hammer and nails and sealed every window in the cabin that night. I knew it was a desperate, mostly useless act, but I had to do something. The next few nights passed with no incidents, no footsteps, no breathing, no light behind the third window. I started to believe maybe it had moved on, that maybe, by refusing to look, I'd starved it of attention. But on the fourth night, just past 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound coming from the wall near my bed. It was a scratching noise, soft and constant.
not mice, not wood settling. This was deliberate, repeating. I leaned close and pressed my ear to the drywall. It was coming from the inside of the wall, something dragging across the interior, low and slow. I followed the sound out of the bedroom.
And down the hall, and it didn't stop until I reached the living room. Then silence. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then came the knock. One knock, a pause, then two more, coming from above, inside the ceiling. I didn't go back to sleep. I stayed up with the rifle in my lap and my back against the door. But the sounds didn't return. The next morning, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I called a local contractor from the nearest town, told him I thought there might be old fire damage in the upper walls and roofline. It was a lie, but I didn't care. I needed someone else to go up there and look, to confirm that there was nothing hidden in the cabin's bones. He arrived that afternoon with a younger guy, and I showed them the spot near the rafters, where I'd heard the knocking. They didn't say much, just nodded, set up a ladder, and started inspecting the beams. I stayed on the ground, trying not to pace, pretending to check messages on my phone. After about 20 minutes, the younger guy climbed down, pale and quiet. I asked him what they'd found. He didn't answer, just walked to the truck and sat inside. The older man came down a minute later and said, "There's an empty crawl space up there, about the size of a small closet, no hatch, no way in or out, just sealed up." I asked if there was any sign someone had been there. He shrugged. "There's dust, but there's also a blanket and a pair of boots, like someone made a nest."
Up there. Then he paused, looking uncomfortable. "And there's something written on the wall in chalk." I asked what it said. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "It said, 'You've seen it now.'" Then he packed up and
Left without another word. After the contractor left, I couldn't stop thinking about the words he found written in chalk. "You've seen it now." It played in my head like a chant, over and over again. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a leftover message, maybe a prank left by someone years ago, some squatter hiding out. But deep down, I knew better. I'd looked into that window more than once. I'd seen what lived there, and worse, it had seen me too. I started tearing the place apart that night. I ripped out ceiling panels, pulled back insulation, checked. Behind every wall I could reach, I was working like a man possessed, like if I didn't act fast, it would be too late. I found nothing, no secret doors, no stairs, no ladders. But the crawl space they'd described, I found it, wedged between the beams above the kitchen, just big enough for someone to slide into if they were thin. I hoisted myself up with a stepladder and aimed my flashlight into the gap. Inside was dust, like the contractor said, and a pile of folded blankets. There were old clothes too, ranger uniforms that had to be my uncle's, worn through and ragged, along with a notebook wrapped in a garbage bag to keep it dry. I pulled it out and climbed down, heart pounding. I didn't even sit before I started reading. The notebook was different from the ranger logs. This was private. pages filled with frantic handwriting, lines running off the margins, and what looked like sketches drawn with shaking hands. He wrote about how the window first appeared after his second year stationed at the cabin. He said he remembered only 2 windows, but one night woke up to find 3. Same as me. At first, he thought it was a design quirk. Then he started hearing footsteps above the ceiling, like I had. Seeing shadows. Feeling watched. He wrote about how it whispered to him in the voice of his late brother, luring him to look, to listen. The more he acknowledged it, the stronger it got. It wears faces, he wrote. It will pretend to be something you loved, but it always takes too long. To blink, he tried everything, blessing the house, staying up for days, even nailing crosses to the beams. But nothing worked. He said the only thing that slowed it down was ignorance, not looking, not naming it, pretending it didn't exist. It feeds on the watcher, he wrote. Not the seen, the seeing. Eye contact is invitation. Awareness is worship. I couldn't read any more after that. I closed the notebook and threw it in the fireplace, lit a match, and watched it burn. I didn't want it in the cabin. I didn't want any part of this thing left around me. But even as the pages blackened and curled, I could feel the window behind me, watching from up high, just out of sight. I didn't dare turn to check. That night, I tried something desperate. I nailed the crawl space shut. Then I took plywood and sealed over the 3rd window from the outside, hammering it in as tight as I could. I sprayed foam in every gap, painted, over the frame, and even placed a mirror facing it from a tree stump across the yard. Some ridiculous advice I remembered from an old folklore book. Then I barricaded the front door, loaded my rifle, and sat on the living room floor, eyes fixed on nothing. At 2:36 a.m. the sound came back. Not walking, not scratching. This time it was laughter, soft, high-pitched, and completely wrong, like a child playing with its voice. It came from the walls at first, then from behind the sealed plywood, then from inside the living room itself. I turned slowly and looked toward the hallway. All the lights in the cabin turned off at once, pitch black. Then a single beam of soft yellow light, faint and flickering, shone through a new window that hadn't been there before. It was in the hallway, same shape, same frame, same old wood as the original 3rd window, but this time it was lower, eye level. And something stood on the other side of it, staring at me, face pressed to the glass, breathing fog onto it in bursts. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I let the tears run down my cheeks, quiet and hot, as the figure tilted its head, slowly, like it was curious what I would do next. Then it smiled. I left the cabin at first light. I didn't pack. I didn't lock up. I just grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't stop until I was almost 100 miles away, where the trees finally thinned and the radio started picking up stations again. For the first few hours, I didn't let myself think about what had happened the night before. I just focused on the road, on the sensation of movement, on the hum of the tires, and the weight of my own silence. It wasn't until I checked into a roadside motel and saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror that I broke. My eyes were bloodshot, my face drawn, but it wasn't just the exhaustion, there was something else. Like I had been hollowed out, like something was still inside me looking back. I stayed in motels for a week, didn't contact anyone, didn't use my real name. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that whatever lived in that cabin needed proximity, that if I got far enough away it couldn't reach me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In every diner I felt eyes on me, in every room I kept the curtains shut tight, and every morning, when I woke up, I'd find small signs that someone or something had been there. My shoes moved slightly. A wet leaf left on the windowsill. Once, a smear of fog on the inside of the bathroom mirror, shaped like a handprint. I finally called my sister. I told her something bad had happened at the cabin, that I couldn't stay there. I expected her to be confused, even angry, but instead she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, then said she remembered Uncle George acting strange after his 3rd year at that cabin, that he became secretive, paranoid. That once, when she stayed with him for a weekend as a teenager, he made her sleep on the floor because the bed was too close to the ceiling. She thought it was just one of his episodes. I asked her why she never told me. She said she didn't remember it clearly until I mentioned it now, like the memory had been locked away. Or maybe, just maybe, that thing didn't like being spoken of. Maybe it pushed those thoughts down, buried them until it needed them again. I hung up shortly after. I didn't want to keep talking about it. The more I did, the closer it felt, like speaking its name would draw its eye again. A month later, I moved into a small apartment in the city. Top floor. No attic. No strange angles. I tried to reclaim something of a routine. Grocery store, walks during the day, sleeping with a light on. I even started seeing a therapist, not that I could tell her the truth. I called it a nervous breakdown and left it at that. Things settled for a time, until the 3rd week, I came home one evening to find the living room colder than usual. Not just cool, unnaturally cold, like the air had been drained of heat entirely. The windows were shut. The heater was running. But the chill hung in the air like mist. And then I saw it. A 3rd window. There, on the far wall between my 2 real windows, was a 3rd. Same size, same shape. The paint even matched the trim. I hadn't seen it that morning. I hadn't ever seen it, but now it was there, and behind it was nothing but darkness. Not the exterior of my building, not the alley beyond it, just a flat black void, and something tall standing in the middle of it, just far enough back that I couldn't make out the face. I didn't scream, I didn't move, I just stared. And as I did, the figure raised one long finger and slowly tapped the glass from the inside. Once. Twice. Then a pause. Then 3 more. Just like at the cabin. I turned and walked.
Out. Haven't gone back since. My lease is still active. My mail is probably piling up, but I know better now.
That thing, whatever it is, doesn't need the cabin. It never did. It just needed me to see it. And now that I have, it can find me anywhere. The worst part, sometimes I still dream of the forest, of the ridge behind the cabin, of looking down at the roof and seeing myself staring back from the 3rd window, smiling as if I never left. Last night, I stayed at a friend's place. I woke up to find a note slipped under the bedroom door. No handwriting. Just 5 words, all printed, in block letters. "You look too long again." What I'm about to tell you was one of the last memories I can still remember from my early 20s, and not for a good reason. I'd argue that it was the most disturbing thing that has ever happened to me. When I was 21, I didn't have a lot of close friends. The people I did have were all a little odd, but then again, so was I. We were mostly loners who had met through community college or weird meetups. No one in our group had a traditional upbringing, and none of us really clicked with the whole party scene or anything remotely social. We preferred nature, books, late-night video games, and most of all, escaping into the woods whenever we could. Looking back, though, I probably should have known better than to go out with people. I barely trusted into the middle of nowhere. But back then, I didn't see it that way. I saw it as freedom. No parents, no schedules, no stress, just firelight, cold beer, and stars. That's how camping trips with Dan and Clara had always felt, up until that final one. I'll skip the boring stuff. Packing, getting groceries, driving for hours with bad cell signal. It was late September, and Clara had found a spot way out in the Oregon backwoods, north of a little town called Oak Ridge. She swore it was the real deal. No campground, signs, no maps, just a trailhead her cousin had told her about, one that led to a clearing near a stream. Supposedly, it had a fire ring, some half-rotted benches, and even an old collapsed cabin nearby. Dan was all for it. He had this fascination with abandoned places, especially those with stories. Ghosts live in memory, not in buildings, he liked to say. Clara just rolled her eyes at that stuff, but deep down I think she got a thrill out of creeping herself out.
Me? I like nature. That was it. That's why I went. We arrived just before dusk. Clara's rusted Jeep Cherokee barely made it up the last part of the trail. When we parked, there was already that feeling. Like silence had weight. Like the forest
itself was waiting. Dan said something dumb about pagan air and made us all laugh, but the laugh didn't last long. That quiet, it settled over everything like a wet blanket. After a short hike downhill through thick pine, we found the clearing. It was exactly as promised, wide open, with a circle of stones and some rotting wooden planks that might have been benches.
Once, the collapsed remains of a cabin rested about 50 feet away, moss-covered, half swallowed by the trees. But the weirdest thing right away was the lantern. It sat on top of a tree stump near the edge of the clearing, right where
the wood started again, and it was glowing. Not brightly, not like electric light, just a soft, steady orange flicker. At first I thought the sun was catching it at an angle reflecting through glass, but then Dan picked it up. No fuel, he said, shaking it. It made no sound. He unscrewed the cap and looked inside. Nothing. The wick was clean. Not wet. Not even burned. This thing's empty, bone dry. We stood around it, watching it flicker softly. Clara finally said what we were all thinking. Is it battery-powered or something? Dan tilted it and turned it over. No switch, no wires. Old school as hell. I mean, this thing looks like it
came out of a damn museum. I remember feeling the hair on my arms stand up, and not because of the cold. Something about it felt off, but I didn't say anything.
Dan hung the lantern from a thick pine branch near the fire ring. It kept glowing, that weird soft glow that didn't seem to move with the wind. That night, everything started normal. We built a fire, cooked hot dogs and baked beans, passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey. Dan told ghost stories like he always did. Clara fell asleep early in her hammock, wrapped up in 3 layers of flannel and cursing the mosquitoes. I stayed up with Dan. We watched the lantern. It didn't dim, it didn't flicker, just sat there glowing like a pumpkin with a soul. Dan tried to joke about it, called it our forest friend, but he was staring at it the way you stare at something dangerous you don't understand. Later, when I finally zipped into my sleeping bag, I felt like I couldn't turn my back on it, like that glow was watching. I know how paranoid that sounds, believe me, but something about it felt wrong, like it had no business being in our world. I should have been surprised when my phone disappeared the next morning, but it was just the start. I woke up with that scratchy, sour feeling in my throat that only comes from sleeping outside with no pillow and too much smoke in the air. The fire had died out to just a soft orange cradle of embers, and the sky was already brightening through the trees. I rubbed my eyes and went to check my phone for the time, but my jacket pocket was empty. I thought maybe I left it in the tent or by the logs where we ate, but I checked everywhere. Nothing. At first I figured it had just slipped out somewhere, in the dark, maybe under the leaves, or even rolled off toward the stream. But after 2 hours of searching, even with Clara helping and Dan pretending to track it like some kind of woodland detective, it was just gone. It wasn't just mine either. Dan's lighter had vanished too. Not a big deal under normal circumstances, but he was the type who carried the same old scratched Zippo for 5 years like it was his lucky charm. It wasn't the kind of thing he'd misplace, and he knew it. I set it down right by the log, he kept saying, then
eventually muttering, "This is messed up."
Clara tried to laugh it off, but I could tell even she was unsettled, especially because the lantern was still glowing. Same stump, same soft flicker, still no fuel. She walked over to it and gave it a good shake, then turned to us and said,
"Okay, seriously, how is this thing still lit?" She was trying to joke, but her voice cracked a little at the end. We were all feeling it now.
That weird pressure in the air, like something standing right behind your shoulder. I remember kneeling to gather some kindling and hearing what I thought was someone walking. Not like rustling through leaves, more like pacing with shoes, measured steps, 4 or 5 slow, steady footsteps, then silence. I looked up and scanned the trees. Nothing. When I asked Dan if he heard it, he just stared at me and said, "I thought that was you." Looking back though, that was the moment. That's when it started to sink in that something was wrong. Not in the normal, creepy woods kind of way. I've felt that before. This was deeper, colder. Like the forest was listening. Later, that day, Clara mentioned the cabin. The one half collapsed near the edge of the clearing. "We should check it out," she said, already walking toward it like it was no big deal. I didn't want to go, but Dan jumped at the chance, so I followed. The closer we got, the worse it smelled, musty and sweet, like wet wood and rotting fruit. It wasn't much to look at. Just the frame of an old hunting cabin, sagging roof and broken windows. Moss had taken over the outer walls and what was left of the porch, but inside there were signs that someone had been there. Or maybe was, still coming back. A rusty metal cot, a clean white sock draped over the back of a chair, a plastic grocery bag with a torn receipt. Dan grabbed it. "Someone was here," he said, scanning the slip. "This is from like 2 weeks ago. The ink was smudged, but you could still make out the name of a convenience store in Eugene, a bag of jerky, batteries, matches. No way this stuff's still here from that long ago," Clara said. "Someone squatting here, has to be." But that didn't explain the lantern, or the feeling I got when I looked at the tiny square mirror nailed to the far wall. It was old, cracked, in the top left corner. And when I caught my reflection in it, I swear to you, it blinked. I know what you're thinking, just a trick of the light, right? I thought that too. I even said it out loud. Just a trick of the light. Dan and Clara nodded, but we all backed out of that cabin a little too fast. That night was colder. The fire didn't want to stay lit, and even though we were all exhausted, none of us really wanted to go to sleep. The lantern was still glowing. Same spot. Same strength. Dan decided to move it into the center of our circle, hanging it on a low branch by the fire ring. "Let's see if it dies out overnight," he said, daring it. It didn't. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone whispering. Not right next to me, but close enough that I could make out a rhythm, like a voice speaking just under breath, repeating something over and over. My first thought was that Dan and Clara were talking, but when I looked over, both their hammocks were still. I sat up and held my breath. "Please, leave. It... there." That's what it sounded like. Over and over. "Please, leave.
It... there." I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just laid back down and pulled my bag over my head like a terrified child. The whispering stopped 5 minutes later, but I didn't sleep at all. I just waited for the sun to come up.
When it did, I noticed something near the fire ring that hadn't been there before. A footprint, a bare one, but not normal. The heel was too long, the toes were too thin. It was pressed deep into the mud, right under the hanging lantern. That's when it hit me. We weren't alone out there. None of us said anything about the footprint at first. Maybe we were too scared to admit it was real. Maybe we just didn't want to be the first one to speak the obvious. But I could tell we all saw it, and we all knew something was off. The print wasn't shaped right. It looked almost human, but stretched, wrong. Dan said it was probably from a wild animal, maybe a bear or a large raccoon stepping weird. But bears don't walk barefoot in clean ovals, and they definitely don't whisper. I tried to act normal that morning. We all did. Clara cooked oatmeal over the fire while Dan walked to the stream to fill up our jugs. I just sat by the stump, staring at the lantern. It was still glowing. Same orange hue, soft and steady. Not flickering. Not changing. Just steady, like it
had a purpose, like it was waiting for something. Clara must have noticed me staring.
"We should just chuck it in the river," she said. She tried to sound casual, but her voice was tight. "I mean, maybe it's got radium or some radioactive junk in it, like old glow-in-the-dark paint." Dan came back around that point, soaked from the knees down. He was breathing hard and looked pissed off. "Something took my other boot," he said.
"I left it on a rock while I was filling the jug and turned around and gone." "Maybe it fell in," I offered, trying to ease the tension. He shot me a look. "I was standing right there. It didn't fall in. It was taken." The word hung heavy in the air. Taken. Not lost.
Not misplaced. Taken. That afternoon, we found something worse. I had wandered off on my own, not far, just past the stream to where the trees thickened and the ground turned soft with moss. I was looking for flat stones to build a wind barrier for the fire pit. But then I saw it. A small mound of dirt with rocks stacked on top like a makeshift grave. At first, I thought it was just an animal burial, maybe something someone had done years ago. But then I noticed the bones sticking out near the base, white, curved and long. Too big to be a rabbit, too small for a deer. I backed away slowly and told myself I'd imagined it. Just a fallen branch, maybe. But then I saw the second one, about 15 feet away. Same shape, same rock stack, same bone. That's when I stopped pretending it was nothing. I told Dan and Clara. Dan came with me to look. Clara stayed behind with the lantern. When we got there, Dan bent down and brushed some of the dirt off with a stick. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "That's a femur." He looked pale. "Not animal. That's human."
I could barely breathe. He stood up fast and wiped his hands on his jeans. "We need to go back. Now." We found Clara standing near the fire ring, her eyes wide.
She was holding the lantern in both hands, staring at it like it had said something to her. When Dan asked what was wrong, she didn't answer right away. Then she looked at us and said, "It's heavier now." Dan took it from her and almost dropped it. "What the hell?" He shook it. Still no sound, still no fuel, but heavier, much heavier. He set it on the stump and it made a deep thud, like it was filled with lead. That night, the woods felt tighter. The trees seemed closer, like they had crept inward while we weren't looking. The sky was clear, stars sharp as needles, but there was no comfort in it. The kind of night that makes you feel like you're being watched from every direction. Around midnight, Dan decided he wanted to see the cabin again. Said he just wanted to check something. Clara begged him not to go alone, so I agreed to go with him. She stayed behind, curled up near the fire with the lantern beside her. The cabin looked darker this time. Not just because it was night, but darker, like it was absorbing light. Dan held up a flashlight, but the beam seemed weaker than before, like the air itself was resisting it. We stepped inside. The mirror was still there on the wall, cracked. The plastic bag was gone. The cot had been moved, dragged closer to the door. But the weirdest part? On the dusty wooden floor, someone had written something in the dirt. "Don't take it." Just those 3 words, all in caps, etched by a fingertip into the dust. Dan didn't say anything for a full minute. He just stared at it. Then he looked at me and said, "We have to leave tomorrow, first thing."
I don't care if the Jeep makes it or not. We hurried back, adrenaline pounding. The woods seemed to close in as we walked. Branches snagged at my jacket. I heard things crunching off the path, too fast to be animals. When we finally got
back to the fire ring, Clara was gone. The lantern sat where we left it, still glowing. But the fire was out, and her sleeping bag was empty. "Clara!" Dan yelled. His voice echoed into the woods. No answer. I grabbed the lantern.
I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. It felt like it might help. I lifted it, and it was cold, ice cold. I nearly dropped it from the shock, but I carried it anyway as we ran into the woods, shouting her name. We found her 10 minutes later, standing barefoot by the stream, shivering. She didn't speak, just stared at the water like she was listening for something. We wrapped her in blankets and brought her back to camp. When she finally spoke, all she said was, I heard it again, the voice. It said it wanted the light. Clara wouldn't talk for a while after that. We got her into her hammock, gave her the rest of our water, and tried to calm her down, but her eyes kept drifting toward the lantern. Every time it flickered, she flinched. She wouldn't even sit near it anymore. When I asked her what she'd heard exactly, she just shook her head and said, it wasn't in English. That didn't make sense. She'd told us it said it wanted the light, but she insisted the words she heard didn't sound like English, that she understood them anyway. Dan wanted to leave immediately. Middle of the night, pitch black forest, be damned. But the Jeep was up a steep trail and none of us felt right hiking it in the dark, with Clara half in shock. We agreed to wait until morning and stay awake in shifts. I took first watch. Dan curled up near the fire with an axe in his arms. I kept the lantern nearby, even though it was still ice cold and heavier than before. Honestly, I was scared of it too, but I was more scared of not being able to see what was coming. The night dragged on. I heard things, not voices this time. Movement, creaks, snaps, the crunch of something heavy walking through the underbrush. Once I thought I saw a shape, low to the ground, hunched, long limbs.
but it stayed at the tree line and didn't come closer. The lantern didn't flicker, but it dimmed for a few seconds. I don't know if I imagined that or not. I was so tired, my brain felt like it was sinking into syrup. When the sun finally rose, everything looked normal again. Birds chirping, trees swaying gently. But none of us felt relief. Clara didn't say a word. Her lips were chapped and she looked pale, like she hadn't really slept. Dan and I agreed. We were leaving, no breakfast, no breakdown, just pack and move. That's when we found the journal. It was under Clara's sleeping pad. A thin black notebook, leather-bound and tied shut with a strip of cloth. None of us recognized it. Clara swore up and down she'd never seen it before. The edges were damp like it had been outside in the dew. But it was clean. Too clean. Dan opened it and started flipping through the pages. His fingers slowed as he read, then stopped. He held it up and showed me. There were drawings, rough pencil sketches, but detailed. A lantern just like ours. Same shape. Same
handles. Then, on the next page, a person holding it. Their face was just scribbles, scratched out with such force that the page had torn in spots. The captions were what made my stomach drop.
They were short, written in tiny print along the edges. "It feeds," one said. Another, "It likes to be seen." And the last one, "Never carry it alone." Dan didn't want to read further, but I took the book and flipped ahead. The pages were full of entries, diary style, descriptions of a group of campers finding the lantern in this same place, seeing it glow, feeling drawn to it. The last few entries were frantic, scrawled in a messy, jittery hand. One read, "Took her into the trees." Her eyes were gone. Another said, "Fire goes out when it's angry, lantern won't." The final entry just read, "It followed me back. It won't stop. I buried them deep. I buried them all. It's still here. I felt cold all over." Dan was pacing now, muttering under his breath. Clara wouldn't even touch the journal. "That wasn't there last night," she kept saying. "I swear it wasn't there." Dan snapped then. He grabbed the lantern and said we were throwing it in the stream. No more waiting. No more theories. He stomped down the path with it swinging from his hand. I followed, half believing this would be it. That maybe it was just cursed, or radioactive, or a bad dream. He hurled it into the water. We watched it sink and then float back up. Not like something full of air. It bobbed gently upright, still glowing. Even underwater we could see that warm orange hue. It didn't stop, didn't sputter, just glowed, soft and steady, like it was watching us from beneath the surface. Dan backed away. "We're leaving, now." We ran back to the site, tossing our things into our packs without folding or sorting. Clara wasn't in her hammock. Her pack was gone. I panicked and yelled her name, but there was no answer, just the wind in the trees. Dan found her footprints, bare, again, leading toward the cabin. I didn't want to go back there, not again, but Dan didn't hesitate. We sprinted through the woods, tripping over roots and ducking under branches. When we got to the cabin, the door was open wider than before. We stepped in and froze. Clara was sitting in the center of the room, the lantern beside her, the same one we'd thrown into the stream. Dry, still glowing. She was drawing in the journal with a stick of charcoal, sketching new pages. Her eyes were glazed over like she wasn't fully there. Dan tried to pull her away, but she screamed, high and sharp like a wounded animal. The light from the lantern flared just for a second, bright enough to cast shadows that didn't match our movements. One of them, I swear, reached toward us. We got her out, but she kept thrashing and sobbing. The journal fell to the floor, flipping open to a blank page. I grabbed it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would help. Maybe I thought it mattered. But the moment I touched it, I felt that same cold pulse I'd felt from the lantern. Back. At the sight, we shoved everything into the Jeep and sped off without tying anything down. Dan didn't care if the road ate the suspension. We just wanted to be gone. Clara sat in the back seat, silent again. But her hand was still twitching, like she was writing on invisible pages. The lantern. We left it behind. Or so we thought. We made it back to town by early evening. I don't even remember most of the drive, just that rattling, bouncing descent down the mountain, pine branches smacking the windows, and Clara mumbling to herself the entire time in that same quiet, shaky voice. It sounded like gibberish at first, just a mumble, but every now and then she'd repeat a phrase. Don't look into it, don't feed it, don't look into it. Over and over again. We pulled into the parking lot of a gas station just outside Oak Ridge. Dan and I jumped out before the engine even shut off. The guy behind the counter must have seen how shaken we looked, because he came out right away asking if we needed help. Dan tried to explain what had happened, or at least the version of it, that didn't sound insane, missing items, weird sounds, and our friend acting wrong. The guy didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. I know the place, he said quietly. Old Barlow campgrounds. They say it was cleared out years ago after a forest fire, but not everything burned. He looked at us for a long second. You didn't take anything from there, did you? Dan hesitated. I said no, flat out, because I didn't want to know what he'd say if I admitted to holding the lantern. But Dan, he had already touched it, carried it, tried to drown it. And Clara brought it into that cabin like she belonged with it. The man gave us the number for a local clinic and even wrote down the name of a park ranger who deals with weird things up there sometimes. That phrasing stuck with me, weird things. Not wildlife, not squatters, just weird. Dan drove us to the clinic, while I sat in the back with Clara. She was curled up, facing the window, her breath fogging the glass. She didn't blink much. At the clinic, they took her in immediately. She started screaming when they tried to take her blood pressure, not at them, at something behind them, something none of us could see. That's when the nurse said they were calling for a psychiatric consult. She looked at me and Dan like we were dangerous, like we'd done something to her. I don't blame her. They kept Clara overnight. Dan and I were told we couldn't stay with her, so we crashed at a roadside motel. I remember lying in bed, every creak in the walls sounding like footsteps, every shadow in the corner too dark. I didn't sleep much. Around 2 a.m., Dan woke me up by shaking my shoulder. You hear that? He whispered. At first, I didn't. But then I did. A soft humming like a gaslight flame, low, steady, vibrating against the walls. And it was coming from inside the room. Dan pointed toward the small table near the window. There, sitting on top of it, was the lantern, still glowing. Same soft orange light. Dry. Cold. No fuel. It was there. We hadn't brought it with
Us. I know we didn't. We left it behind. We threw it in a stream. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. Dan crossed the room slowly, like he was moving through thick water. He picked it up, and it didn't resist him.
It just sat there, humming like it was content to be with us again. We left the motel an hour later, didn't even ask for a refund. Just tossed the key at the night clerk and bolted. We tried to get into the clinic to see Clara, but they said she had been sedated after an episode during the night. She kept trying to bite herself, apparently. Said the light inside her needed to get out. That was the last time I saw her in person. Her parents came and had her transferred out of state. I heard she got better. But then again, I don't know if that's true. Dan and I went to the ranger station like the guy at the gas station recommended. We were desperate. The ranger's name was Rivas. Big guy, leathery skin, the kind who probably lived out in a cabin without Wi-Fi. He let us in, listened to us carefully. Didn't interrupt once. When we finished, he just asked, "You still
Have it?" Dan nodded and set the lantern on the floor between us. Rivas stared at it. Didn't even blink when it started glowing again. "Damn things back," he said under his breath.
Then he stood up, walked to a locked cabinet, and pulled out what looked like a sealed metal box and a pair of thick gloves. "You boys understand that thing's not yours. It never was. It's not really anyone's. That light, it doesn't belong here." He packed the lantern in the box like it was a dangerous animal, bolted the latches, didn't ask us anything else. "You didn't see me. You didn't give me anything. You just got lost in the woods. Tell the cops that if they come asking." He adjured Danny, and I stood outside the station for a long time after that. He lit a cigarette with a borrowed match and stared at nothing in particular. "So that's it?" I asked. "It's over?" He didn't answer, just blew out a cloud of smoke and said, "No, it's never over with something like that." Looking back, though, I think we both knew it wasn't done with us. It's been 3 years since that camping trip. I moved across the country, changed my number, even went by a different name for a while. Not because I was running from someone in the traditional sense, but because I was running from something. From a memory that never stopped glowing in the back of my mind, like that lantern still burning in the dark. I kept telling myself it was over. Rivas took it, locked it up. Maybe buried it in a bunker in the woods somewhere, or dropped it into a cave too deep for light to reach. But that hope only lasted so long. Dan and I kept in touch at first, mostly through short, paranoid texts. Then those messages started getting stranger. He told me about seeing the glow again, not in person, but in reflections, storefront windows, car mirrors, once in the microwave door, while he was heating up leftovers. "It's not the same exact light," he wrote, "but it feels like it. Same color, same shape, like it's testing me." I didn't know what to say. Then one day, he stopped responding entirely. I left him voicemails, emailed, even called his brother, who said Dan had left town a week earlier and hadn't said where he was going. Just packed a duffel bag and disappeared. The last message I ever got from him was one
line, "Follow me again."
"If you see the light, don't look into it." I told myself he just lost it, that the whole thing had broken him and he couldn't take it anymore. I tried to live a normal life. I got a job in Portland, worked for a while at a bike shop, then picked up freelance gigs doing graphic design. The days blurred together. I kept my head down, avoided forests, never lit candles or used anything that flickered. But a few weeks ago I got a package in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Just a padded envelope, sealed tight with brown tape. Inside was a journal. The journal, Clara's drawings, the scribbled warnings, the final page that had been blank the last time I saw it, now filled. It had my name, over and over again, written in different styles, different hands. Sometimes huge across the page, other times squeezed into the margins, and next to each entry was the same phrase, "The light remembers." I dropped it, almost threw it in the trash. but I didn't. I couldn't. I needed to know if it meant what I thought it did. I flipped through it again. Most of the pages were the same, until I found a new one, clearly newer ink. On it was a map, hand-drawn. It pointed back to the same clearing in the Oregon woods, back to that cabin. And taped to the final page was a photo, a printed one, taken at night. It showed someone, maybe Dan, I don't know, standing in the doorway of the old cabin, and just beside him, hanging from the same branch as before, was the lantern, still glowing, brighter than I remembered. I tried to ignore it. I put the journal in a drawer and didn't touch it for days, but weird things started happening. First, it was the light bulbs. One in the bathroom popped while I was brushing my teeth. Then the hallway light started flickering any time I passed beneath it. The final straw was when my neighbor came by and asked if I'd been using a porch light in the middle of the night.
"It's weird," he said. "It was like this orange glow coming out your window at 2 a.m, like an old gas lamp. Creepy as hell, man." I hadn't left a light on. I checked every bulb, every outlet, every switch. Nothing could explain that
Glow. Last night, it came back. I woke up to that same low humming sound I thought I'd escaped. I sat up in bed and saw it, just a faint orange flicker, reflected in the mirror on the closet door. I turned on every light in the house.
Nothing helped. The glow was still there, watching. So now I'm writing this.
I don't know what else to do. I haven't seen Clara in years. Last I heard, she was in some holistic treatment place in Arizona. No phones, no visitors, just a locked gate and tall fences. I doubt they'd even let me in if I showed up. I don't
know if Dan's alive. I want to believe he is, but the silence feels final. I haven't slept in 2 nights.
I keep hearing footsteps on my porch. My dog won't go near the back room anymore, and I swear, I saw that lantern sitting on the windowsill this morning, just for a second. Then it was gone. If this thing is still out there, still following people, still glowing where it shouldn't be, then someone needs to know. Someone has to believe me. I didn't ask for this. We just wanted to camp. We just wanted a weekend away, but we took something, even if we didn't mean to, and now it wants to come back. This morning, there was a note on my front step, just a single sheet of paper folded in half, weighed down with a smooth grey stone. No envelope, no tape, no writing on the outside. I stared at it through the peephole for at least 10 minutes before I opened the door. The note was written in the same jittery handwriting from the journal, the kind that looks like it was scribbled by someone whose hand couldn't stop shaking. It said one thing. Oh, you left it. It didn't leave you. No name, no signature. But underneath the writing, there was a tiny, burned-in imprint. A soot mark in the shape of a lantern. I didn't touch the stone. I just left it sitting there, note and all. I locked the door, turned on every light in the house, and sat in the corner of the living room with a baseball bat across my lap, and the dog pressed against my leg, shaking. I called the police.
Know how that sounds? I didn't tell them about the lantern, obviously. I just said someone had been on my property, left a threatening note. They sent a young officer who looked too tired to care and too polite to call me crazy. He walked the
property, checked for prints, found nothing, said it was probably a prank, kids, or maybe an old friend messing with me. But I saw how his eyes lingered on the stone before he picked it up with a pen and dropped it into a plastic bag. He asked, "Do you know what this symbol is supposed to mean?" I lied and said no. He left shortly after, said they'd file
a report, but I knew that was the end of it. But the thing is, It's not over. I know that now. Tonight the power went out. No storm, no wind, no warning. Just the lights flickering once, twice, then gone.
The whole house sank into that heavy kind of silence that feels too quiet, like the air itself is waiting. And then I saw it, outside my window, down by the end of the driveway. That same orange glow, soft and steady, like a single eye open in the dark. I thought it was a trick of the mind, maybe headlights, maybe reflection, but then it moved. Closer, step by step, bobbing slightly like it was being carried. But I couldn't see anyone holding it. I locked the front door, bolted the back, grabbed my bat, and ran upstairs. I watched from the second-story window. The light had stopped just under the tree in my yard, the same kind of tree we hung the lantern from that first night in the woods. I waited for hours. Eventually the glow faded, but not all the way. Even now, there's still a hint of it in the glass, like an ember that won't go out. I haven't
Left the house since. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's still the same one, or if it is the one keeping the light alive.
But I know this. It never needed fuel. Never needed a match. It just needed people. Eyes, attention, and now that I've seen it again, now that you're reading this, you'll see it too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one night when it's quiet and the lights start to flicker, you'll feel that hum in the walls. And if you see that glow outside your window, don't go to it, don't open the door, don't carry it, because once you do, it never goes out. I used to think the worst part about working in youth recreation was the kids who never listened, the constant sunburn, or the paycheck that made you wonder why you didn't just flip burgers instead. That was before I took the short-term caretaker job at Echo Hollow and learned what real danger looked like. Not the kind that jumps out from behind trees or hides in the woods, but the kind that waits in the quiet, the kind that listens, the kind that copies. I needed the money badly, fresh out of a pretty rough breakup, scraping by in a city that got more expensive every week. I couldn't afford to be picky. I'd been working odd jobs through an app, handyman gigs, yard work, even the occasional dog-sitting job if it paid in cash. Then I saw the listing. Live-in camp caretaker needed. 1 month. Room and board provided. $2,500 stipend. That was more than I'd made in 2 months. I clicked immediately. The camp was one I knew well. Too well. Echo Hollow. Tucked somewhere, in the Appalachian fringe of Western Virginia, way off any main road. No cell signal, no nearby towns, just trees and memories. I'd gone there as a teenager with a few friends during its final summer season. It had shut down less than a year later. Rumors swirled about mold, failing structures, and a lawsuit involving a counselor and a camper's missing medication. But to us, it had always just been our place. The one pocket of time when everything still felt wide open and endless. I hadn't been back in over a decade. The listing didn't mention much, just that the camp needed a caretaker to prep the grounds for a historical restoration being pitched by new investors. I figured it was some venture capital pipe dream, turning an old camp into an eco-retreat or overpriced wedding venue. Still, I didn't care. All I had to do was live in the old director's cabin, do some light repairs, clean up any obvious hazards, and send in weekly reports. It sounded peaceful, a reset. I could bring my laptop, maybe work on some side gigs, and breathe air that didn't smell like car exhaust. So the onboarding was weird though. The guy who hired me never gave me his full name, just Tom. He spoke in clipped phrases over the phone, and every time I tried to get more detail about the job, he changed the subject. When I asked about keys or access codes, he said this cabin would be unlocked and that everything I needed would be waiting. The contract was a single-page PDF with no letterhead, just a signature block at the bottom with the company name Reverberation LLC. I don't know why, but that name gave me a weird chill. Something about it felt off. But the money was real and my bank account was not. So I signed. I arrived in early May, just after a stretch of heavy rain. The gravel path leading into the camp had been washed out in places, forcing me to leave my car half a mile up the road and hike the rest in with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The forest was dense, too dense, the kind of thick, wet green that seems to absorb sound. No bird song, no rustling, just my boots on the wet earth and the sound of my own breath. When I broke through the tree line and saw the first cabin, it was like stepping into a memory and a dream at the same time. Echo Hollow hadn't changed much. The archway over the main trail still had the wooden sign, letters barely hanging.
On welcome campers. Most of the buildings were intact, though weather-worn and leaning. The dining hall, the mess shelter, the canteen, all still standing. The lake was dull and murky, but still had the same mossy dock at the far end.
And the director's cabin, my new home, sat a little ways off from the others, just as I remembered. Slightly elevated, wide porch, 2 windows in front, and a long path that disappeared into the trees behind it. The morning after my first night, at Echo Hollow, started slow. The woods were quiet, still soaked from the week of rain, and fog hovered just above the forest floor. I made some coffee using a kettle I found tucked away in a cabinet, and stood on the cabin's porch while it boiled, watching the mist swirl through the empty campgrounds. It was peaceful in a way that felt staged, like the whole place was holding its breath. I tried not to think about the line in the welcome note. Do not engage with sounds after dark. Probably just a leftover joke from a counselor with too much time and too many ghost stories. My job list for the day was simple. Tom had sent it by email the night before I arrived. Clear brush from the West Trail. Check the structural integrity
Of the mess hall deck. Inventory the first aid station. Nothing I hadn't done at 100 other job sites. Still, there was something unsettling about doing it alone in a place that used to be full of people.
Every time I opened a door or stepped into one of the buildings, it felt like I was intruding, not on the space, but on the absence left behind. The mess hall was the worst. I remembered it vividly from our last summer here. Long benches, metal trays, fans that never worked right. It still smelled faintly of old wood and mildew, but now it had this sour, coppery undertone I couldn't place. The deck creaked under my weight, more than it should have. I crouched to inspect the beams and found deep, claw-like scrapes running along the edge beneath the railing. Not natural weathering, not animals. These marks were deliberate, sharp, vertical, and spaced like long fingers dragging across the grain. I stepped back and made a mental note to take photos for the report. While heading toward the nurse's station, I stopped by cabin 3, mine and Jake's old bunk back in the day. I don't know why I opened the door. Curiosity, maybe? Or nostalgia? But as soon as it swung open, a wall of cold air hit me. It was much colder than outside, and not just drafty. It felt like walking into a fridge. Dust clung to every surface, and the air had a strange static buzz to it, like an old TV left on in another room. At the far end of the cabin, someone had scrawled a message across the wall in marker. It was faded and jagged, but I could still read it. Do not laugh back. That night I kept the porch light on and moved the dining chair next to the window so I could see out over the camp. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe to catch a raccoon scurrying by, maybe just to settle the unease that kept clenching in my stomach every time the wind shifted. I kept thinking about the things I'd read: folklore, Appalachian ghost, stories, old ranger legends passed around over fire pits. The one about sounds that don't die, echoes that learn. They say if you laugh too loud in the mountains, the forest learns your voice, and sometimes it laughs back. Around 11 p.m. I heard it, faint, off in the trees beyond the cabins. It was my name, Chris, just once, sharp, clear. Same voice as Jake's, exactly how it sounded when we were 15. For a moment I smiled. Maybe he'd come out to surprise me. Maybe someone was playing a prank. But then it called again. Chris. This time slower. The tone wasn't right. Too hollow. No breath behind it. Like a recording. Like something. Trying to be human, but not quite making it. I stayed completely still. Everything in me screamed not to answer, not to move, not to react. I closed the curtains, shut off the light, and sat on the floor until the sun came up. I'll skip the boring stuff from the next day. Trail cleanup, more photos, another brief check-in from Tom via email. He never acknowledged the weird stuff, never asked if I was doing okay, just report received, keep it up. That night, it was quiet. No voices, no movement. I convinced myself it was all in my head, just the woods playing tricks. But on the third night, I heard it laugh. The third night started off almost normal. I made a quick dinner, canned chili and some crackers, then spent the evening rereading one of those dog-eared paperbacks I always pack, but never finish. It was finally starting to feel like a routine. I even started to believe I'd imagined the voice. Just some trick of memory or nerves, the kind of thing that happens when you're isolated too long and your brain starts stirring up ghosts to keep you company. But by the time I settled into bed and shut off the lamp, the air in the cabin had changed. It felt heavier, charged, like the quiet wasn't really quiet, but listening. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke up at 1:47 a.m. to the sound of laughter, not the echo of it, not something distant or buried under the wind. This time it was right outside my window, sharp, familiar, my own voice. It laughed exactly the way I had when Jake fell into the lake that summer, the same snort and stammer.
And breathless gasp. But I hadn't laughed like that since I was 16.
I knew that laugh because I remembered teasing him for how bad he was at diving and how we both almost got kicked out for pushing each other into the water over and over. That moment wasn't recorded anywhere, wasn't spoken of since, but now it was outside, repeating like a sound clip stuck on loop, just low enough that I had to strain to hear it. I pulled the curtain back slowly. Nothing was there. Just the outline of the lake shimmering in the dark, trees swaying gently, and a trail of footprints in the mud, bare, human-looking, leading away from my porch. I put on my boots and grabbed the flashlight. I know how that sounds. I should have stayed inside, locked the door, called someone, but the thing is, I didn't feel threatened, not yet. I felt curious, like I was being dared to follow. And when you're stuck in the woods with no company but your own thoughts, curiosity starts to look a lot like courage. The prints led down toward the lakeside dock. That old structure should have collapsed years ago, but somehow it still stood, warped and crooked, but whole. As I stepped onto the boards, the laughter stopped. The air went dead still. I swept the flashlight across the trees, across the water, and paused when the beam caught a shape at the end of the dock. A small cassette tape recorder sat there, one of those cheap plastic ones counselors used to use for morning announcements. I hadn't seen one since high school. The play button was pressed down. I picked it up. There was no tape inside. The next morning, I found a note tacked to the door. Same typeface as the original "Do Not Engage" message, but this one was shorter. It read, "You laughed, it listened." I searched the whole camp after that, every building, every trail. I didn't find anyone, no campers, no squatters, no Tom, nothing but more signs that someone had been here recently. New scuffs in the dirt, freshly snapped branches, and what looked like fingernail marks along the sides of cabin 3. Long, deep, and deliberate. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on, drinking instant coffee and reading old camp logs I'd found in the storage shed. Bunk assignments, first aid reports, notes from counselors to each other. Most were normal until I found a folder labeled Echo Reports. They weren't formal documents, just loose leaf pages with chicken scratch notes. The first one read, "Sounds coming back wrong, voices looping in patterns. Avoid repeating anything you hear. If it mimics, leave." Another said, "Not a ghost, it's older, maybe not alive at all. It doesn't want your voice, it wants your shape." That was when it hit me. The laughter I'd heard my own voice from years ago wasn't just being echoed. It was being studied, practiced. I started remembering that summer more clearly now. How Jake had gone missing for an entire afternoon. How, when he came back, he barely spoke. How he kept glancing into the woods like something was watching. Back then, we thought he was just shaken from getting lost. But what if he hadn't been? Alone? What if something had followed him back? By dawn, I made the decision to leave. I didn't care about the contract. I didn't care about the money. Whatever lived in this place wasn't just mimicking sounds. It was learning who I was, piece by piece, and it was getting closer. By the fourth night, I was sure I wasn't alone out there. Not just in the general creepy forest way, but in the very real, physical sense. I started noticing things, subtle details that only someone who spent time outdoors would pick up on. Twigs snapping in a pattern that wasn't random. Rocks rearranged on the trail like crude markers. A single boot print pressed into the mud beside the canoe rack, identical to mine. Not just the same size and tread, but the same scuff on the heel. I checked my own boots. Same mark, same wear. Something had copied them perfectly. That night, I locked the cabin door for the first time since arriving and pushed the dresser against it. It felt silly, like I was overreacting. But part of me remembered those logs, the ones saying, "It doesn't want your voice, it wants your shape." And now it had the sound of my laugh, my name, my footsteps. What else did it need? I was dozing off on the couch, some old camp map spread across my lap, when I heard someone knock on the door. 3 soft knocks, then silence. I held my breath, listening. Nothing followed, no voice, no second knock, just that awful, stretching silence that makes your heart pound and your ears strain. I waited 5 minutes before I even moved. Then I stood slowly, reached for the flashlight, and peered through the peephole. No one was there. I stepped away. Then the knock came again. Same rhythm, same pause, but this time it came from the window on the opposite side of the cabin. I spun around and saw the outline of someone standing just beyond the glass. The moonlight caught enough of the figure to make out its posture. Tall, slightly hunched, arms long enough to hang past the waist. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just stood there, as if waiting for me to make the next sound. And then it said, "Chris, open up, it's freezing out here." Same voice, same tone, same exact words Jake had said to me the night we locked him out of the cabin as a prank in 2008. But Jake wasn't here. Jake lived 3 states away, had 2 kids, and a herniated disc. Jake hadn't spoken those words in over a decade. My hand froze halfway to the door latch. The part of me that wanted to believe this was a trick, a prank, started to fade. Because I realized something then. That thing wasn't just copying voices, it was copying moments, specific, emotional ones, the kind that leave marks. The laughter on the dock, the voice from the woods, and now, this. I didn't open the door. I just backed away, slowly, until I was pressed against the wall. I kept my eyes fixed on the figure outside until the sun began to rise, and its shape faded with the light. When I finally stepped out at noon the next day, there were no footprints, no signs of anyone having stood there. But the window had something new on the outside, a smear in the shape of a handprint, 5 fingers, long, thin, as if whoever had touched it had no bones at all, just stretch and skin. I emailed Tom that afternoon, told him I needed to leave, that there was something wrong with this place. I didn't go into detail. I didn't need to. His reply came within 5 minutes. It read, "Departure not advised. Mimicry accelerates with disruption. Stay silent."
Avoid reflection. I didn't respond. What did avoid reflection even mean? Was he talking about literal mirrors? Or was this some metaphor for attention? Either way, I unplugged the bathroom mirror light and threw a towel over it just in case. I left the windows covered. I didn't speak, not even to myself. I even stopped humming, something I didn't realize I did so often when anxious. I made no sound that night. None? The cabin did? I heard myself crying from the crawl space.
Above the ceiling, I hadn't cried in years, and that night I stayed up without lights. I thought if I gave it nothing, no sounds, no signs, no acknowledgement, it might lose interest. That maybe this thing only reacted when it was mimicked back. I even laid towels along the cracks of the doors and windows, hoping to keep out whatever cold it always seemed to carry with it. But silence wasn't protection. Not anymore. Not when it had already collected the pieces it needed. Sometime after midnight, I heard the front door handle jiggle. Not forcefully, not like someone trying to break in, just a calm, steady turn, as if the thing on the other side already believed it had the right to enter. I froze, didn't breathe, my back pressed to the kitchen cabinet, flashlight gripped in one hand, a steak knife in the other. I had no plan beyond hiding. The door didn't open, but the sound of it turning never stopped. Just the slow click
of the knob twisting left, then right, then left again. It must have gone on for 10 minutes. Then it was quiet. I waited. Nothing. Not until I turned to glance at the hallway and saw my own face standing in the shadows. It was me. Not a lookalike. Not someone similar. It was me, exactly how I'd looked a few minutes earlier. Same clothes, same unshaven.
Jawline, same slight slump from a lifetime of bad posture, except its eyes weren't right. They were too dark, like there was no reflection inside them at all. No light, no depth, just pits. I dropped the flashlight. It didn't move, it just watched. Then it spoke in my voice, down to the cadence.
And breath. It's okay, Chris. You're just tired. Let's lie down. Let's laugh. That last word cracked like a bad recording warping.
Then it grinned. Not a normal grin. Too wide. Teeth that didn't match my own. Gums, grey. Lips stretching past what skin should allow. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted out the back door into the trees, no shoes, no jacket. I heard it behind me, first its voice, then its steps, faster than mine. It didn't chase like a person would, no breaking branches, no panting, just footsteps appearing too close, too suddenly, like it wasn't running through the woods, but around them, beside them, behind the folds of space where sound slips and echoes bounce. At one point I heard it ahead of me, calling out, "Chris, Chris, where are you?" In the exact tone my mother used when she lost me in the grocery store as a kid. A voice it could never have known. That broke me. I dropped to my knees, behind an old canoe rack, and covered my ears. I started whispering to myself, not words, just static nonsense to drown out the voice.
I don't know how long I stayed like that, but when I looked up, the sun was starting to rise and the woods were quiet again. Really quiet. No more mimicry, no more copies. Just my breath and the sickening certainty that I'd been inches
from losing more than just my mind. When I got back to the cabin, the inside was untouched. Nothing out of place, nothing stolen or broken, but the window was open. And scrawled into the condensation on the mirror, in the same blocky font as the typed notes, was a new message. The first sound is your last. I didn't pack. I didn't care about the paycheck. I just threw what I could into my backpack, left the rest, and started walking toward the access road. Every few yards I'd stop and listen, making sure there was no second set of footsteps behind me. I never heard any. But I never heard birds either, or wind. Just my own breath and a silence that wasn't quite real. When I finally reached the road, I saw my car exactly where I'd left it, except the windshield was fogged up, and inside, written backwards so it could only be read from the driver's seat, were the words, "Come back laughing." I didn't drive home. I drove straight to a friend's place 2 states away and slept in their basement for 3 nights, with music playing loud enough to drown out anything that might have followed me. But I think it still heard. I didn't talk about what happened for a long time. I told my friend, Rob, that I bailed on the job early because of mold in the cabin and a generator that kept failing. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and offered his basement couch for as long as I needed. I tried to fall back into normal rhythms, junk food, bad TV, endless scrolling, pretending the world was still solid beneath my feet. But the silence didn't stay behind. The thing about mimicry is, once it knows your sound, it can find you, anywhere. The first few days were quiet. Then I started hearing things in Rob's place that didn't belong. Snippets of conversation I never said, music from playlists I hadn't opened in years, and laughter, always laughter, from behind the bathroom door when no one else was home. The kind that starts low and quiet, like it's trying not to get caught. I'd freeze mid-step, wait, heart pounding, and tell myself it was nothing, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. One night, while Rob was out on a date, I heard the door, too. The basement creak open. That wasn't unusual. Old house, cheap hinges. What was unusual was the fact that it opened twice. Once in front of me, as I watched it swing inward from my spot on the couch, and again behind me, a second set of hinges groaning low and long, as if there were a second basement no one had told me about. The air dropped 20 degrees in under a second. My breath fogged. And then I heard my own voice whisper from the far end of the room. "Chris, why'd you leave me?" I turned and saw nothing, but the space between the bookshelves felt wrong, like something tall had just stepped backward into it. I stayed in a hotel that night. Didn't tell Rob, didn't explain. I just left. The next day, I checked my email for the first time since leaving Echo Hollow. There were no updates from Tom, but there was a new folder in my inbox, unmarked, just a string of letters and numbers. Inside were audio files, hundreds of them, all labeled with dates from the last 2 weeks. I opened one and heard myself speaking, not narrating or talking to anyone, just muttering things in my sleep. One of them was just me humming a tune I hadn't heard since middle school. Another was a single phrase repeated over and over: "Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer." They weren't recordings I'd made, they were from somewhere else, time-stamped and geotagged to locations I hadn't visited, including a forest road in Virginia 2 days after I left the camp. A place I never went back to, but my voice did. I should have known better than to assume running would fix it. That's what all the old stories get wrong. The idea that survival means
Escape.
the truth is, sometimes you survive just long enough to become a vessel for something else. I hadn't just heard the mimic, I'd let it inside. With every sound I made, I taught it a new piece of me. Every laugh, every cry, every word in the dark, that was its fuel. And now it didn't need to stay in the woods. It could travel through recordings, calls, forgotten voicemails. Rob found a tape recorder in his glove compartment the next week. He said it wasn't his. I told him to burn it. It's been 4 months since Echo Hollow, and I haven't spoken a full sentence out loud in the last 3. I text, I type, I nod and shake my head, but I do not speak. I keep the TV on at night, run fans, use noise machines, anything to keep real silence from falling, because when it does, that's when I hear it again, not always in my voice. Sometimes it's someone else's, someone I love. Sometimes it's no one I know at all, which is worse. It means it's still growing, still collecting, still playing with its library of human pieces like a mixtape of lives it's never lived. I finally tried to report it, once. I drove to a ranger station 2 counties over and tried to explain what happened without sounding insane. I thought maybe someone would recognize the place, that maybe they'd say, "Oh yeah, Echo Hollow, weird things always happened there." But when I mentioned the camp by name, the ranger blinked like I'd made it up. She said no such site had been
Registered in decades. Showed me the state maps. Blank. Just miles of unzoned forest land.
the kind no one builds on because it never stops being wild. I didn't push the issue. I didn't need to. On my way out, a radio behind the front desk crackled to life and played a sound that froze me to the floor. My own voice, recorded, clear as day, asking, "Do you believe me now?" The ranger didn't react. She didn't seem to hear it at all. That's when I understood the final piece of it. This thing doesn't want to hurt people, at least not in the way we think.
Of hurting.
It wants to be real. It wants presence, recognition. It wants a place in the world where it can laugh and cry and speak and be heard. And we are how it does that. Our voices are its tools. Our sounds are the strings it pulls until it has enough to build a version of life it can wear. Last week, a package arrived at my door. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside was a cassette recorder, the same make and model I found on the dock. Taped to it was a note in that same blocky typed font. All echoes need a home. I haven't touched it. I don't even know if it's playing. I keep it locked in a drawer wrapped in foil and towels, but sometimes, when the room is still, I swear I can hear it laughing. My laugh from the inside. A friend recently tried to get me to go camping again, somewhere upstate, remote, peaceful, no cell towers. I told them no, I didn't explain, but when I hung up I caught something. In the background of the voicemail they left, barely audible. A small, broken version of my voice saying, Chris can't come, but I'm here. So if you're reading this, do me a favor. Don't play old tapes, don't laugh too loud in the woods. Don't answer when you hear your name called from the dark. And whatever you do, don't speak if the sound that comes out doesn't
feel like yours. Because I haven't spoken in 3 months, but sometimes I still hear myself talking.
When I was in my late 20s, I couldn't afford the extravagant hunting trips that all the older guys at my job went on every fall. You know the type, fully guided, all-inclusive lodge stays in the Rockies with hot meals, private blinds, and a wall full of trophies waiting for a taxidermist. Because of this, I spent my first 7 seasons hunting solo, weekend hikes with cheap gear, old maps, and not much to show for it, but cold fingers and a few blurry photos of deer I never managed to tag. By the time the 10th season rolled, around my final shot at a proper backcountry buck, before I gave up and sold my rifle, I realized it was basically my last chance to get the full experience I'd been missing out on. The work crew at the mill had started calling me tagless behind my back. I pretended not to care, but it ate at me. I wanted one season, just one, where I could come back with something more than stories and frostbite. That's when I found the cabin. It was listed on an old hunting forum I still checked out of habit. A guy named Pete posted that he was leasing a remote spot near the Swan Range in Montana for dirt cheap. Said it was primitive but functional, and right on the edge of where the big muleys were moving. No running water, no cell signal, but plenty of quiet, he promised. He had stayed there once with his uncle and said it was the kind of quiet that resets a man's bones. I should have been suspicious right then. I emailed him. The price was a joke, like he was daring someone to take it. I paid for the weekend with a prepaid card, got GPS coordinates and 2 rules: bring your own fuel for the stove and don't shoot anything at night. The second rule made me pause. I even asked about it in a follow-up message, and all Pete said was, "The woods carry sound differently after dark." I laughed it off, figured he was just trying to scare off city, guys who'd shoot at raccoons. I packed my gear the next day, basic stuff. 3-8 bolt-action rifle, 2-day pack with freeze-dried food, filter straw, a box of fire starters, and my dad's old headlamp that hadn't failed me once. I also brought a solar power bank and my
emergency radio just in case. I'm not reckless, I go off-grid, but I always have a way back. The drive out was long, longer than I expected.
dirt roads turned to gravel, gravel turned to hard-packed mud, and then, finally, I reached the tree line. The forest there was dense, thick pine trunks leaning just slightly inward, like they'd been whispering to each other for decades. The air was sharp, clean. I felt a little lighter the second I stepped out of the truck. The cabin sat maybe 2 miles off the nearest drivable trail. I hiked in at golden hour, the sun slanting sideways through the branches, and I swear, for that first hour, it was everything I'd hoped for. The cabin was a squat little thing, dark wood with a green metal roof, one small chimney puffing, just enough to show it had been used recently. A single door, 2 shuttered windows, a basic front porch with an old cooler tipped over on its side. Remote. Quiet. Mine. I let myself in. The inside was dusty but clean, a cot in one corner with wool blankets folded neatly, a pot-bellied stove with a ring of charred logs around it, a rusted lantern on the table next to a yellowed topo map, and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. Whoever used it last hadn't been there in a while, but the place felt watched over, cared for. Looking back, though, I should have been more curious about the roof. That first night, I lit a fire in the stove, heated some soup, and sat on the porch in full camo, rifle across my lap, watching dusk settle between the trees. No cars, no birds, just the creaking of old timber and the occasional snap of a distant branch falling in the cold. It was perfect. I stayed out until the stars came, then went inside, bolted the door, and climbed into the cot. That's when I heard it, the first sound that didn't belong. It was soft. Just a tick, 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 like claws on wood. Somewhere above me, in the rafters. I figured it was a squirrel or maybe a raccoon that had gotten in through a gap in the roof. I tapped the ceiling with the butt of my flashlight. The sound stopped. I went to sleep thinking nothing of it. In the morning, the air was so still it felt staged. The trees didn't move. The smoke from the stove chimney rose in a dead line. I stepped outside, glassing the ridgeline beyond the trees with my scope, and immediately saw a set of prints, fresh, crisp, deep.
Mule deer. Big ones. I grabbed my rifle and pack and set out. That day was the kind of hunting day you dream about. I tracked for hours. Found signs, rubs, droppings. I even spotted 2 does crossing a ravine just before noon. No buck yet.
But I was close. I could feel it. By the time I returned to the cabin, I was exhausted. Sun going down, legs numb. I made a fire, cooked a quick meal, and stretched out on the cot with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years.
I was finally doing it right, until I looked up. Something was hanging in the rafters. At first, I thought it was a heavy bundle of rope. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it had legs. 4 of them, black, motionless. One twisted at
the wrong angle. It was a deer, or what used to be one, matted fur, exposed bone, guts tangled in the beam, its head cocked sideways, looking down at me with one cloudy eye. There was no hole in the roof, no sign of blood on the floor.
No trail? It was just there. I didn't move at first.
Just laid there on the cot, staring up at it, waiting for the image to shift into something else. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was a weird shadow or a trick of the firelight. But it didn't change. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. There was a deer carcass stuffed into the ceiling beams of the cabin, not hanging from a rope.
Not dragged up there, wedged, like someone had taken a broken, half-rotted body and jammed it into the rafters by force. Its front hooves were twisted inward, back legs split open like someone had snapped them sideways. No blood on the floor, none dripping down, just that single dead eye fogged over, pointing straight down at me. I stood up slowly. The cabin creaked, but nothing else moved. The fire popped once, and I jumped hard enough to nearly knock the lantern off the table.
I grabbed it, lit it, and held it up toward the ceiling. Up close, the body looked worse. The chest had been ripped open. The ribs were visible. Something had eaten parts of it, but cleanly, like it had been peeled instead of torn. The smell hadn't kicked in yet, but I knew it would. The temperature inside the cabin was just warm. Enough. I backed out the front door, walked off the porch, and bent over in the dirt until I could breathe again. I tried to come up with explanations. A bear, maybe. Somehow, dragged it in through a gap in the roof, left it up there, then got out without leaving any signs. But that didn't make sense. The roof was sealed. I checked it myself the first night. No claw marks, no torn shingles, nothing that looked like it had been touched in years. The rational part of my brain started cycling through possibilities. Maybe the deer had gotten stuck up there during a storm years ago, and the decay had just now shifted it into view. Maybe someone was messing with me. Pete, the guy who leased the place. Maybe he planted it for a joke. A sick prank for city hunters. But no one else was out there. No one even knew I was there, except for Pete, and I didn't even use my real name when I booked it. That night, I didn't sleep in the cabin. I built a fire about 20 yards away, slept in my bivvy sack with my rifle across my chest and my eyes on the front door. Nothing came out, nothing moved, but I didn't sleep either. The next morning, the deer was gone. Not dragged, not eaten. Just gone. No blood, no fur, no smell. I climbed onto the cot and checked the beams. There was a faint, dark streak where its belly had been resting, but nothing else. Just empty wood and dust, like it had never been there. I considered packing up, leaving, but I didn't. I don't know why. Pride, maybe. Stubbornness. I told myself if someone was messing with me, they wanted me to panic. They wanted me to quit. I wasn't going to give them that, so I cleaned the place up. Took down the curtains to shake the dust out. Chopped more firewood, even though I already had enough. Tried to convince myself I could turn things around. Get back to why I was out there in the first place. Afternoon, I mapped out the ridge again. I marked down where I saw the mule deer signs where the trails split. I planned to hike up the western slope early the next morning and spend all day on the high ground. The deer move more when the sun's out, and if I could just focus, I might finally get a shot worth taking. I was going to keep hunting. That was the plan. But plans don't matter out there, not in a place that doesn't play by the same rules. And that night I tried to sleep inside again. The cabin felt heavier somehow, like the air was thicker. I kept checking the ceiling every few minutes, shining my headlamp across the beams, just to make sure nothing had come back around it.
Midnight, the scratching started. It came from inside the walls.
Not like a mouse or a rat. Louder, heavier, like something with weight, shifting slowly behind the boards, not frantic, not wild, just steady, deliberate. A dragging sound, slow and long, followed by sharp tapping, tick, 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 that echoed through the cabin in strange patterns. I sat there, frozen in the cot, clutching the rifle and staring at the wall like I could see through it. Then something knocked, 3 times. From the other side of the back wall, clear, measured, knock, knock, knock. I didn't go outside. I didn't move. I just waited, praying the stove fire wouldn't go out. When I finally drifted off, it was morning. The sun cut through the slats in the window, and for a moment, just a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream, until I saw what was lying on the floor beside the door. A deer antler, fresh, still red at the base, still warm. It hadn't been there when I fell asleep. I should have left right then, when I saw that antler. It wasn't just that it was fresh, or that it hadn't been there the night before. It was the way it was placed, set down with the wider end pointing directly at my boots, like a signpost, like a message. But I still didn't leave. Instead, I wrapped it in a rag, tucked it into my gear, and convinced myself it had been dropped by a predator. Maybe a wolf or a cougar had dragged a carcass near the cabin, and I hadn't noticed. That was possible. Not likely, but possible. I held on to that word like it was a lifeline. I ate a protein bar, packed up my rifle, and headed for the western ridge. If I could just stay out all day, if I could see something normal, any deer, even a squirrel, anything that moved like it should, I could reset my brain. The hike was rougher than I remembered, the slope steeper. My boots didn't grip like they had the day before, and the forest was quieter, too quiet. I didn't realize how much I relied on sound until it vanished. No birds, no wind. Just my own boots scraping over the rocks and that awful, heavy silence that felt like holding your breath for hours. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating under my thermal layers and breathing like I'd run a marathon. I dropped my pack behind a tree, scanned the ridgeline through my scope, and froze. There was a man standing in the trees across the valley. Far enough away I couldn't see his face, but close enough to know he wasn't supposed to be there.
No blaze orange, no gear, just standing. Still. I kept watching. He didn't move, didn't shift. I started to wonder if it was a trick of the light, maybe a burnt stump or a dead tree that happened to look like a figure. But after nearly
10 minutes of watching, it finally stepped back behind a tree and vanished. I radioed on the emergency channel. No response. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the trees. On the opposite ridge, where the figure had stood, every tree leaned inward just slightly, bent toward the middle, like they'd been pulled that way by gravity or time. But none of the trees near me did. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Like that side of the woods had a different spine, a different weight. I stayed on the ridge for another hour, maybe 2, but I never saw any deer, no prints, no movement, no sound. The forest wasn't dead, it was just watching. Eventually I packed up and started back. I told myself I'd make a fire, cook something hot, shake the fear loose with some good food and heat. That always worked in the past. It had to work now. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was low. I stoked the stove with fresh wood, pulled out a pack of freeze-dried chili, and tried to ignore how my hands were shaking as I lit the match. Then I saw the second antler. It was on the cot, neatly placed, mirroring the first, same size, same clean cut, same deep red at the base like it had been severed that morning. I checked my pack. The first one was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the stove with my rifle across my lap and the lantern on full blast. I kept the front door bolted, but I swear I could hear someone walking in circles outside. Not pacing, dragging, one slow step at a time.
around and around. Sometime after 2 a.m., I heard a long, low creak above me, the rafters. I stood and aimed the rifle up. Light caught on something wet, just for a second, then vanished. I climbed onto the cot, pulled the lantern close,
and stared up. There was nothing there, but a drop of something thick and dark landed on my cheek. I should have left right then. When I saw that antler, it wasn't just that it was fresh or that it hadn't been there the night before. It was the way it was placed, set down with the wider end pointing directly at my boots like a signpost, like a message. But I still didn't leave. Instead, I wrapped it in a rag, tucked it into my gear, and convinced myself it had been dropped by a predator. Maybe a wolf or a cougar had dragged a carcass near the cabin and I hadn't noticed. That was possible. Not likely, but possible. I held on to that word like it was a lifeline. I ate a protein bar, packed up my rifle, and headed for the western ridge. If I could just stay out all day, if I could see something normal, any deer, even a squirrel, anything that moved like it should, I could reset my brain. The hike was rougher than I remembered, the slope steeper. My boots didn't grip like they had the day before, and the forest was quieter, too quiet. I didn't realize how much I relied on sound until it vanished. No birds, no wind. Just my own boots scraping over the rocks and that awful, heavy silence that felt like holding your breath for hours. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating under my thermal layers and breathing like I'd run a marathon. I dropped my pack behind a tree, scanned the ridgeline through my scope, and froze. There was a man standing in the trees across the valley. Far enough away I couldn't see his face, but close enough to know he wasn't supposed to be there. No
No blaze orange, no gear, just standing. Still, I kept watching. He didn't move, didn't shift. I started to wonder if it was a trick of the light, maybe a burnt stump or a dead tree that happened to look like a figure. But after nearly
10 minutes of watching, it finally stepped back behind a tree and vanished. I radioed on the emergency channel. No response. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the trees. On the opposite ridge where the figure had stood, every tree leaned inward just slightly, bent toward the middle, like they'd been pulled that way by gravity or time. But none of the trees near me did. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Like that side of the woods had a different spine, a different weight. I stayed on the ridge for another hour, maybe 2, but I never saw any deer, no prints, no movement, no sound. The forest wasn't dead, it was just watching. Eventually I packed up and started back. I told myself I'd make a fire, cook something hot, shake the fear loose with some good food and heat. That always worked in the past. It had to work now. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was low. I stoked the stove with fresh wood, pulled out a pack of freeze-dried chili, and tried to ignore how my hands were shaking as I lit the match. Then I saw the second antler. It was on the cot, neatly placed, mirroring the first, same size, same clean cut, same deep red at the base like it had been severed that morning. I checked my pack. The first one was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the stove with my rifle across my lap and the lantern on full blast. I kept the front door bolted, but I swear I could hear someone walking in circles outside. Not pacing, dragging. One slow step at a time.
around and around. Sometime after 2 a.m., I heard a long, low creak above me, the rafters. I stood and aimed the rifle up. Light caught on something wet, just for a second, then vanished. I climbed onto the cot, pulled the lantern close,
and stared up. There was nothing there, but a drop of something thick and dark landed on my cheek. I ran until my lungs felt like they'd collapse. Trees whipped past me, branches clawing at my jacket, roots trying to catch my boots. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. I just wanted to put distance between myself and that place, that voice, that thing that sounded like me. Eventually I stopped, gasping, leaning against a tree as sweat froze against my spine. My ears rang from the sudden silence, and when the adrenaline wore off, I realized I'd dropped my compass. My pack was still on, rifle still slung, but the one tool I trusted most was gone, and I wasn't about to go back for it. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to find high ground. My hope was to get a view above the tree line, spot something, anything familiar. But no matter how long I walked, the woods refused to thin out. I couldn't even tell if I was going uphill anymore. It all blended together, trunks leaning like crooked teeth, the sky barely visible through the mesh of dead needles. And that's when I saw the first antler again, lying in the middle of a clearing, perfectly clean, still blood wet at the base. It was the same one. I know it was. Same. Chip along the edge, same size. I hadn't brought it with me, but there it was, just sitting there, waiting. I turned to leave and stopped cold. There was a second antler behind me. Same placement as before. Same direction. As if they had been laid down after I'd entered the clearing, placed so that I'd be standing between them. I didn't run this time. I walked. Slowly. Deliberately. I didn't want to trigger whatever was watching. I didn't want to give it the reaction it was trying to get. The forest was silent, but heavy. like I'd stepped into a room where everyone had been talking and suddenly stopped. It was around that time the air began to change. The smell hit first, sweet and sick like rotting apples mixed with wet fur. It came in waves, drifting between the trees like it had a mind of its own. I pulled my scarf up over my nose, but it didn't help. The smell felt like it was inside my head, and then I heard it. A low groan, long, wet. Not like any animal I've heard before. Not elk, not bear, not anything. It didn't come from one direction. It came from all around, echoing between the trees like it was bouncing through a hollow cave. I raised my rifle and spun slowly, trying not to panic. My breath fogged up my scope. I wiped it with my glove and saw something move just beyond the trees. Tall, thin, walking. At first I thought it was a man, but it moved wrong. Too slow, too smooth. Its legs were long, deer-like, but bent in the middle like a folding chair. Its arms hung low, and its head, it looked like a deer's skull but stretched, oversized. Antlers made of branches, still covered in bark. It passed between the trees without breaking a single twig. And it was looking at me. I didn't shoot. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. Maybe because I was too scared to even move. I just stood there, heart slamming against my ribs, while it stopped and tilted its head to one side, slow and curious, like it was trying to decide what I was. Then it smiled, not with a mouth,
Not with lips, but something in the tilt of its face, the way the teeth caught the light. It was mimicking human expression poorly. It took one step toward me, and that's when the trees behind me snapped. I turned and ran. No path, no direction, just away. The forest seemed to close in around me. The air got thicker. My legs felt like they were moving through syrup. I could hear it behind me, no footsteps, just that same groaning breath getting closer. Then I saw the cabin again, not the original, not the rotted one, a different one, smaller, older, covered in ivy, almost completely buried in the hillside. The door was open. I ducked inside and slammed it shut behind me, bracing it with my back and waiting for the pressure on the other side, but none came. It was pitch black. I pulled out my lighter and flicked it once. The flames sputtered, caught, and lit up a small cramped space, bare walls, dirt floor, and dozens of antlers nailed to the ceiling, all clean, all bleached white, and all pointing downward. I don't know how long I stayed in that second cabin. Time blurred into nothing inside those dirt walls, and every time I lit my lighter, I saw more of those antlers, dozens of them, nailed carefully into the ceiling, some overlapping, all angled downward like they were meant to press in. It was like being inside a jaw. There was no cot, no stove, nothing useful. Just old carvings in the wood I couldn't read, slashes and spirals and symbols that didn't belong to any language I knew. They looked scratched, not drawn, like someone or something had clawed them in slowly, obsessively. That smell, the sweet rot, was still there too. Closer now, like it had followed me inside. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time my eyes closed, I heard footsteps. Not walking, but pacing. Just outside the door, crunching slowly through pine needles, circling again and again, then tapping on the wood, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more, like it was trying to figure out a rhythm that would make me open the door. I never did. Not once. I stayed still, rifle in hand, my back against the wall like it would matter.
At some point, hours later, maybe more, I heard the tapping stop, then silence. I thought it was over. I stood up, crept to the door, and pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Just dead air. But when I opened it, there was no forest. Just more cabin. Another room. Different than the one I had just been in. Brighter, lit by natural light through a broken roof. And this one had furniture, an old chair, a mirror, and in the corner something that stopped me cold. My pack, my rifle case, my original lantern, all placed neatly like they'd been unpacked by someone who knew exactly where I kept things. Everything that had been at the first cabin now moved here. But the scariest part, my sleeping bag was rolled out in the corner like someone had just gotten out of it, still warm when I touched it. I looked around wildly, trying to make sense
of it. Was I walking in circles? Was this another hallucination? But there was no way I had gotten back here. The second cabin was miles from where I'd started. It should have been impossible. Then I noticed the mirror.
It was cracked, but standing upright against the wall. At first, I avoided looking at it. I've always hated seeing my reflection in strange places, especially out in the woods. But eventually I couldn't help it. I turned toward it, and what
I saw wasn't me. Not exactly. It looked like me, yes. Same face, same jacket. But my reflection's mouth was just a little too wide. Its eyes didn't blink when I did. And worst of all, its hands were empty. I was holding my rifle. It wasn't. I
backed away slowly, not daring to blink. The reflection stood still. Then its head tilted, exactly like that thing in the woods. Slow, off-kilter, almost curious. I turned away and refused to look back. I gathered my gear as quickly as I could, shoving things into the pack at random, not caring about weight or order. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop to think.
I just ran again. This time, the trees opened up into a clearing, and in that clearing was something so out of place it made me freeze. A fresh fire pit, still smoking, a folding chair, an open thermos lying on its side, steam still curling from
the spout. Someone had just been here, but there were no footprints, no tire tracks. Nothing human to prove the scene had any logic behind it, just evidence that someone had been here and left in a hurry.
I didn't sit. I didn't check the food. I didn't even grab the thermos. I backed away into the woods. Behind me, I heard something take a deep breath. Not a growl, not a scream, just an inhale, long, ragged, slow. Like the forest itself was pulling me in through its teeth.
I ran again, faster than before, trying to put miles between me and the cabins. My legs burned. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. And still, I ran. I didn't make it far before I saw the antlers again, this time not
on the ground. They were above me, woven through the branches, strung high in the trees like wind chimes. Hundreds of them, twisted, blackened, humming in the breeze.
And beneath them, etched into the dirt in a massive circle, was the same spiral symbol I'd seen in the second cabin. Except this time, it was made with bones. Deer bones, human bones, all small, weathered, and clean. In the center of the spiral was a stone. Just one. Flat and black, about the size of my fist. Sitting on top of it was my compass. I didn't touch it. I didn't go near it. I turned and walked the other way, calmly, carefully, making no sound. Whatever had done, this wanted me to react. It wanted me to feel helpless. I wasn't going to give it that. I kept moving until the antlers disappeared above me and the spiral was gone from view. But when I reached the next rise and looked down, the cabin was there again. Same porch, same chimney, same exact slant of the roof I had stared at my first night in. This time the door was already open, and the deer in the rafters was waiting. I didn't want to go inside. I told myself I wouldn't. But my legs kept moving forward like they weren't mine anymore. The open door framed the inside in perfect shadow, and from where I stood, I could already see the deer, or what was left of it. Its body had changed. The limbs were longer now, stretched in ways that didn't make sense, almost human. But the head was still there, barely attached. One foggy eye turned right toward the doorway. I raised my rifle, ready to shoot at anything that moved, but I couldn't bring myself to fire. Something inside me screamed that doing so would make it worse. That whatever had been playing this game didn't care about bullets. That it was waiting for me to choose the wrong thing. So instead, I backed away. One step, then another, watching the door, watching the ceiling. Then I ran. And this time, somehow the trees let me go. The forest didn't twist. The sky didn't change. I followed the slope down and didn't look back. I didn't rest. I didn't stop until I hit the edge of a gravel road. When I saw the curve of a faded US Forest Service sign ahead, I dropped to my knees and laughed until my chest hurt. I made it. Somehow, I made it. A ranger found me walking down the road an hour later, mud-caked, eyes bloodshot. No idea. What day it was, I didn't tell him the truth. I said I got lost, that I'd eaten something bad, maybe wild mushrooms. He nodded, didn't push, just gave me water and sat me in the truck. I was taken to a clinic, then home. I said I wouldn't go back into the woods again, and I meant it. For a while, I didn't even go to the park near my apartment. Trees felt wrong. Even the smell of pine needles made my skin crawl. I tossed the boots I wore up there, burned the jacket. A month later, Pete called. He sounded annoyed, like I'd cost him money. Said I'd left the cabin unlocked and left gear behind. I told him I didn't want any of it back. He paused, then asked what I meant by the cabin. I told him the one on Hollow Ridge, the one with the cracked chimney and green porch. He was quiet for a long time. See, then he said, I don't own anything on Hollow Ridge. I checked the receipt from my email after I hung up. The GPS coordinates weren't where I remembered. They mapped to a spot almost 10 miles off. Nothing marked, no address, just forest. I haven't gone back. But last night, I found something in my apartment. A fresh deer antler placed gently on my pillow, and a set of muddy hoof prints leading to the window, which was locked from the inside.